Tonight we will explore the weight of our actions, how every choice we make ripples outward in ways we cannot see, touching lives we will never meet, returning to us transformed. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply rest here, allowing these stories to wash over you like water flowing downstream. If this path of gentle wisdom calls to you, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of nighttime seekers. Together, we walk this ancient way, learning from those who came before us, finding peace in teachings that have guided countless souls toward understanding. We often believe our small actions disappear into the vastness of the world, that what we do in private stays private, that our individual choices matter little in the grand sweep of life. Tonight, we will discover how wrong this belief can be. We will see how every action, no matter how small, creates waves that travel far beyond our sight, eventually finding their way back to us in forms we never expected. Let us begin this journey together, breathing gently as we open our hearts to these teachings. Take a moment to feel your breath moving naturally in and out of your body. Notice how the air enters and leaves without effort, connecting you to the world beyond your skin. There is nothing to force, nothing to control. Simply be here with these stories that have waited patiently to be told. Let us explore a story about Natan, a dyer of cloth who lived in a village where the river ran clear and cold through the center of town. There once lived a cloth dyer named Natan in a village that hugged the banks of a wide, flowing river. The water ran clear as glass, reflecting the morning sky and carrying the songs of birds from the mountains to the sea. Natan had learned his craft from his father and grandfather before him, and his hands knew the ancient ways of turning plain cloth into rich colors that caught the eye and warmed the heart. His workshop sat beside the river, built on stilts that let the water flow beneath it during the rainy season. Inside, great vats held the precious dyes, indigo deep as midnight, crimson bright as blood, yellow like the heart of sunflowers. The air hung thick with the smell of herbs and minerals, the sharp tang of mordants that made colors hold fast to cloth. Natan took pride in his work. Merchants traveled from distant cities to buy his cloth, praising the way his blues stayed true through years of washing, how his reds glowed like fire even after countless wearings. His reputation had grown beyond the village, and with it, his prosperity. But with prosperity came impatience. The old ways took time, preparing each batch of dye carefully, waiting for the proper season to harvest roots and berries, disposing of used dye water in the proper manner. His grandfather had taught him to dig pits away from the river, lined with clay, where spent dye could slowly seep into the earth without poisoning the water that others drank. Why such trouble? Natan asked himself one morning as he looked at the vat of indigo water, dark and thick with residue. The river is vast. My small amount of dye will disappear like a drop of rain in the ocean. He looked around his workshop. No one was watching. The nearest house stood a good distance away, and the morning mist hung low over the water, hiding him from view. Natan made his choice. He opened the spout at the bottom of his vat and let the dark water flow directly into the river. The indigo spread like a stain, creating a blue-black plume that the current caught and carried downstream. Within minutes, the evidence had vanished around the bend. Natan felt a moment of guilt, then shrugged it away. The river was large, and he was only one dyer. Days passed. The work went faster now that he no longer spent hours digging new pits or maintaining the old ones. More cloth meant more profit. More profit meant a better life for his family. Natan convinced himself he had made a wise decision. Week after week, he emptied his vats into the river. Indigo one day, madder red the next, sometimes yellow from turmeric roots, occasionally the deep brown that came from walnut hulls. Each color disappeared quickly in the flowing water, carried away by the current toward the sea. The village downstream from Natan depended on the river for everything. Fishermen cast their nets in the shallows where small fish like to feed. Farmers dug irrigation channels to bring water to their rice paddies. Women came to the banks to fill their clay pots for cooking and drinking. Children played in the pools where the water ran slow and shallow. At first, the changes were subtle. The fish began to taste strange, not spoiled, but somehow different, with a bitter edge that made people wrinkle their noses. The rice in the paddies grew more slowly, the green shoots looking pale and weak. Women noticed that the water in their pots sometimes had an odd color, blue or red or brown, that settled to the bottom like fine mud. "The river is sick," said Deepa, an old woman who had lived by the water all her life. She pointed to the dead fish floating belly up in the shallows. "Something upstream is poisoning it." But the village downstream was small and had little influence. When they sent messages to the regional administrator, their complaints were noted, but no action was taken. The river was long, touching dozens of villages. Finding the source of pollution would require more investigation than anyone wanted to undertake. Meanwhile, Natan's business thrived. He hired 2 apprentices to help with the increased demand for his cloth. His wife Mira bought new brass pots for the kitchen and had the house roof repaired with proper tiles instead of thatch. His twin children, a boy and girl of 7 years, ate well and played with toys carved from good wood. The family drew their water from a well that Natan's grandfather had dug behind the house, far from the workshop and the river. The water ran clear and sweet, filtered through layers of sand and stone. Natan had never thought to wonder why his grandfather had chosen to dig so deep when the river ran so close by. One morning, after a particularly busy week of dyeing cloth for a merchant caravan, Natan discovered that his well had run dry. The recent dry season had been longer than usual, and the water table had dropped below the reach of his grandfather's old well. "No matter," he told Mira. "We will fetch water from the river like everyone else until the rains come and the well refills." Mira walked to the river with her clay pots, returning with water that looked clear enough in the vessels. She boiled it for tea and used it for cooking rice. The family drank and ate without worry, trusting in the same river that had sustained their village for generations. Within days, both children fell ill. It began with stomach pains, cramping, that made them double over and cry. Then came the loose bowels, watery and frequent, that left them weak and dehydrated. Their skin took on a grayish pallor, and dark circles appeared under their eyes. Mira called for the village healer, an elderly woman who knew the properties of herbs and the signs of various ailments. The healer examined the children carefully, feeling their foreheads, looking at their tongues, pressing gently on their bellies. "This looks like poisoning," she said quietly to Mira and Natan. "Something they ate or drank that their bodies cannot process." "But they eat the same food as always," Mira protested. "The same rice, the same vegetables from our garden." "What about water?" the healer asked. "Where do you draw your water?" "From the river," Natan answered, but his voice caught in his throat. For the first time since he had begun dumping his dye waste, he thought about where the water in the river came from and where it went. The healer nodded grimly. "Others in the village have reported similar symptoms, always in families who draw their water directly from the river. Those with deep wells remain healthy." That evening, Natan walked down to the riverbank and stared at the water flowing past his village. The current moved constantly, carrying water from upstream to downstream, connecting his workshop with villages he had never seen, tying his choices to the lives of strangers. He thought about the physics of water flow, something he had learned as a child, but never truly considered. Water moves always downhill, always toward the sea. What goes into the river upstream must flow past every village downstream. There are no boundaries in water, no walls that say, this belongs here and that belongs there. His own children were drinking the same water that carried his waste, not directly, for his dyes had flowed far downstream before circling back through the vast network of streams and tributaries that fed the river system. But water knows no ownership, recognizes no borders. The poison he had released into the flow had become part. We will return to Natan's story, but first let us explore another teaching about the consequences of our choices. There was once a young man named Gopal who worked as an apprentice to a blacksmith in a city known for making the finest weapons in the region. The smith, Master Dhanraj, had earned his reputation through decades of careful work, forging blades and arrowheads that soldiers trusted with their lives. Gopal had quick hands and a sharp eye for detail. He learned the craft rapidly, understanding how to heat iron to just the right temperature, when to fold and hammer, how to temper steel so it would hold an edge without breaking. Within 2 years, he could make arrowheads nearly as fine as his master's, each point sharp enough to pierce leather, each shaft socket perfectly sized to hold firm. The workshop buzzed with constant activity. Orders came from military units stationed along the border, from hunters who needed reliable points for taking game, from merchants who traveled dangerous roads and wanted good weapons for protection. Master Dhanraj employed 6 smiths and 4 apprentices, and even working dawn to dusk, they struggled to meet demand. Gopal watched the business with growing understanding of its value. Each arrowhead sold for several copper coins. A dozen arrows could feed a family for a week. The finished weapons that hung from hooks around the workshop represented more wealth than his family had ever seen. His wages as an apprentice were fair, but modest, enough for food and a place to sleep, enough to send a small amount home to help his parents, but not enough for the things he wanted. He watched other young men his age who wore fine clothes and carried coins that jingled in their pockets, and he felt the sharp edge of envy. I make these arrowheads with my own hands, he told himself. My skill shapes them as much as Master Dhanraj's. Why should he profit from my work while I remain poor? The thought took root and grew. Day after day, as he worked at his anvil, Gopal calculated the value of what his hands produced versus what his master paid him. The mathematics of resentment made his reasoning seem clear. He deserved more than he was getting. The workshop system for tracking finished goods was simple. Each day's production went into large baskets, sorted by type and quality. At week's end, Master Dhanraj would count everything and record the numbers in his ledger. With hundreds of pieces produced each week, he relied on the general count rather than examining every individual item. Gopal saw his opportunity. Each day, he began setting aside 2 or 3 of his finest arrowheads, hiding them in his clothing before the evening count. Such a small number from such large production would never be missed, he reasoned. Master Dhanraj's wealth was so great that this tiny reduction would cause no harm. At night, Gopal would take his stolen goods to a different part of the city, selling them to merchants who asked no questions about their source. The coins felt heavy in his pocket, solid proof of his cleverness. He bought better clothes, ate richer food, and began to feel that he was finally receiving what his skills deserved. Weeks passed. Gopal grew bolder, taking 4 or 5 arrowheads instead of 2 or 3. He told himself that he was only claiming his fair share, that any reasonable master would pay an apprentice more for such skilled work. His thefts were so small compared to the workshop's total output that surely they harmed no one. One morning, Master Dhanraj called all the workers together. His face looked drawn with worry, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone listen carefully. "We have received complaints," he announced. "Captain Surya of the border garrison reports that some of our arrowheads are failing in battle. Points that should pierce armor are bending or breaking. Soldiers have been wounded, some killed, because their weapons failed at the crucial moment." Gopal felt his stomach tighten, but he said nothing. How could his small thefts be connected to soldiers dying in battle? Master Dhanraj continued. "I have examined our work methods and can find no fault in our process. We use the same iron, the same techniques, the same quality standards we have always maintained. Yet somehow, inferior arrowheads are reaching our customers with our mark upon them." The master's eyes scanned the faces of his workers. "I suspect that someone has been replacing our finished goods with cheaper copies, stealing the originals to sell elsewhere. This is not merely theft, it is murder. When a soldier's weapon fails, he dies. When he dies, his family grieves. When his unit loses men to faulty equipment, the entire defense of our region weakens." Gopal's hands began to shake. He had never made copies to replace what he stole. He had simply taken finished goods and left gaps in the inventory. But he began to understand what must have happened. When Master Dhanraj discovered shortfalls in his weekly counts, he would have assumed the missing pieces were lost or miscounted. To fulfill his orders completely, he would have worked longer hours or pushed his smiths to increase production speed. Faster work meant less careful work. Less careful work meant some arrowheads that looked acceptable but lacked the proper strength. Or perhaps, and this thought made Gopal's throat close with fear, perhaps Master Dhanraj had bought replacement arrowheads from other smiths, cheaper ones who cut corners on quality, to make up the numbers that Gopal's thefts had reduced. These inferior points would have borne Master Dhanraj's mark when sold, but lacked his quality. Either way, Gopal's small thefts had set in motion a chain of consequences he never intended. Soldiers had trusted their lives to weapons that looked like Master Dhanraj's finest work, but lacked the strength to perform when needed most. That evening, news came that shattered what remained of Gopal's peace. Captain Surya himself had been killed in a skirmish when his arrow failed to pierce an enemy's leather armor. The bent arrowhead had been recovered from the battlefield, and it bore the distinctive mark of Master Dhanraj's workshop. The captain's death created a scandal. Master Dhanraj was arrested and charged with providing defective weapons to the military. Despite his protests that such work was impossible from his shop, the evidence seemed clear. His reputation, built over decades, crumbled in days. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel your body supported by whatever holds you now. Allow your shoulders to soften, your jaw to release. There is nothing you need to carry right now, no burden you must bear. Simply breathe and be present with these teachings. The trial of Master Dhanraj became the talk of the city. Witnesses testified that his weapons had always been reliable before this recent trouble began. Former customers praised his integrity and skill, but the evidence of the failed arrowhead was undeniable, and the testimony of surviving soldiers was damning. "A smith who sends faulty weapons to war is guilty of treason," declared the judge. "He betrays not only his customers, but his country." Master Dhanraj maintained his innocence until the end, insisting that no arrowhead of such poor quality could have left his workshop through honest means. but he could provide no explanation for how inferior goods had reached the battlefield bearing his mark. The sentence was death by execution, to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence. Gopal spent those 3 days in agony, understanding at last the true weight of his actions. He had told himself that stealing a few arrowheads from a wealthy master caused no real harm. But his thefts had created gaps that led to rushed production or inferior replacements. Those inferior weapons had failed soldiers in battle. Those failures had killed men, including the captain whose death had brought down Master Dhanraj. On the morning of the execution, Gopal ran to the courthouse, pushing through crowds to reach the magistrate. "Stop," he cried. "Master Dhanraj is innocent. I am the one responsible for the faulty arrowheads." He confessed everything: the months of small thefts, the way he had justified his actions, his failure to understand how removing finished goods would affect the workshop's ability to maintain quality. Through tears, he explained how his tiny crimes had set in motion the events that led to soldiers' deaths and his master's condemnation. The magistrate listened to Gopal's confession with growing anger. "You mean to tell me that Master Dhanraj sits in prison, condemned to die, because of your petty theft?" "Yes, sir," Gopal whispered. "My small thefts created the very problems that made him look guilty." But it was too late. Master Dhanraj had already been executed at sunrise before Gopal's confession could reach the authorities. The man who had taught Gopal his craft, who had trusted him with knowledge and opportunity, who had built a reputation on honor and quality, was dead because his apprentice had failed to understand the consequences of small crimes. The Buddha, who was passing through the city and heard this story, said to those gathered around, "Your small theft set a chain of consequences you never imagined." When we take what belongs to others, we do not simply remove an object from their possession. We disturb the entire web of relationships and trust that holds society together. What seems like a private action between yourself and your victim actually touches the lives of everyone who depends on that person's integrity. Gopal spent the rest of his life trying to make amends for his actions, but Master Dhanraj remained dead. Captain Surya remained dead, and the soldiers who had fallen because of faulty weapons remained dead. No amount of regret could undo the chain of consequences that had grown from what seemed like such small thefts. This story shows us how interconnected our actions truly are. Gopal discovered that stealing from systems of safety creates deaths you never intended. Buddhism teaches that every action, no matter how small it seems, sends ripples through the web of existence that connects all beings. When we take what belongs to others, we disturb not just our immediate relationship with them, but the entire network of trust and reliability that others depend upon. Let us pause here and breathe gently. Notice how your breath connects you to this moment, to this teaching, to the understanding that is growing in your heart. There is nothing you need to figure out right now. Simply rest and allow these insights to settle like water, finding its level. We will explore another story about the consequences of our choices, this time following a midwife named Savita, who had delivered hundreds of babies safely and grew confident in her abilities. There once lived a midwife named Savita in a mountain village where births were celebrated as the greatest blessing life could bring. She had learned her craft from her mother and grandmother, inheriting not only their knowledge of herbs and birthing positions, but also their gentle way of guiding frightened young mothers through the sacred passage of bringing new life into the world. For 15 years, Savita had attended births throughout the region. Her hands knew the feel of a baby moving into proper position. Her ears could distinguish between the healthy cries of labor and the sounds that meant danger. She carried in her memory the wisdom of hundreds of successful deliveries, which plants helped when bleeding was too heavy, how to turn a breech baby, when to be patient, and when to act quickly. Her success rate was remarkable. In a profession where death often shadowed birth, where mothers and babies died from complications that no one knew how to prevent, Savita had lost only 3 mothers and 5 babies in all her years of practice. Other midwives sought her advice, and young women training in the craft begged to apprentice with her. With each successful delivery, Savita's confidence grew. She began to trust her instincts absolutely, believing that her experience had taught her everything she needed to know about birth and its dangers. When other healers offered suggestions or warnings, she listened politely, but rarely changed her methods. "I have seen every kind of birth," she would tell herself. "I know what works and what doesn't. Experience is the best teacher." One autumn evening, a young merchant named Ravi came to Savita's door, his face tight with worry. His wife, Priya, had been in labor for 2 days, and the baby still had not come. Priya was exhausted, barely able to push anymore, and the family was growing frightened. Savita gathered her supplies and followed Ravi through the narrow mountain paths to his house on the edge of the village. Inside, she found Priya lying on a bed of clean cloth, attended by her mother and sister. The young woman's face was pale with exhaustion, her hair damp with sweat from hours of laboring. Savita examined Priya with gentle, experienced hands. The baby was positioned correctly, head down and engaged. The labor seemed to be progressing normally, just slowly. Sometimes, especially with first babies, labor could take days. Patience was often the best medicine. "Rest between contractions," Savita advised Priya. "Your body knows what to do. We must trust the natural process." As the night wore on, Priya's labor continued but seemed to stall. The contractions remained strong, but the baby advanced very little. By dawn, the young mother was near collapse from fatigue, and her family's worry had deepened to fear. Ravi approached Savita hesitantly. "My cousin lives in the next valley," he said. "She knows of a physician there, a man trained in the medical colleges of the capital city. Should I send for him?" Savita felt a flash of irritation. "A physician?" she asked. "What would a man know about birth? Has he ever delivered a baby himself? Has he felt the movement of new life in his own body?" "But my wife grows weaker," Ravi said. "Perhaps this doctor knows something that could help." "I have attended hundreds of births," Savita replied firmly. "This is difficult but not unusual. Sometimes babies take their own time coming into the world. Adding strange interventions from someone who lacks experience would only create more problems." Ravi's face showed his conflict between trusting Savita's reputation and his growing fear for his wife's life. Finally, maternal love won. Priya's mother stepped forward. "Send for the physician," she said quietly. "If Savita's methods work, he will simply confirm her wisdom. If they don't, we need someone else to try." But Savita shook her head. "You cannot serve 2 approaches at once. Either you trust my experience or you don't. Mixing methods will only confuse the situation and endanger both mother and child." Her confidence was so absolute, her reputation so sterling, that the family reluctantly agreed to continue with her care alone. The physician was not summoned. Hours passed. Priya's labor grew more difficult, not easier. Her contractions became weaker and less frequent, as if her body was giving up the struggle. The baby's heartbeat, which Savita checked by pressing her ear to Priya's belly, seemed slower than it should be. By the second afternoon, Priya could barely lift her head. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid. Her skin felt cold despite the warm cloths her mother kept placing on her forehead. The baby had not moved downward at all in nearly a day. Savita had seen difficult labors before, but something about this one troubled her in ways she couldn't name. The pattern felt wrong, not dangerous in the familiar ways she knew how to handle, but wrong in a way that her experience hadn't prepared her for. Yet her pride prevented her from admitting uncertainty. Sometimes, she told the family, the body needs to rest before the final push. This is natural. We must continue to wait and trust. But Priya's condition continued to deteriorate. Her pulse grew thready and fast. She began to drift in and out of consciousness between contractions. Her lips took on a blue tinge that made her mother weep with fear. As evening approached on the third day of labor, Priya stopped responding to voices. Her breathing became so shallow that her chest barely moved. The contractions had nearly stopped altogether. Ravi fell to his knees beside Savita. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "Send for the physician now. I don't care what methods he uses. I can't lose her." For the first time in years, doubt crept into Savita's mind. She looked at Priya's still form and realized that her confidence might have blinded her to something important, but her pride still fought against admitting she might need help. It would take hours for a messenger to reach him, and hours more for him to return, she said. By then, it might be too late anyway. Ravi stood and began putting on his traveling cloak. "Then I will go myself and bring him back as quickly as possible. Watch over my wife until we return." He ran from the house into the mountain darkness, following paths that were treacherous even in daylight. His love for Priya drove him forward despite the danger of falling or losing his way. Alone with the failing mother, Savita finally allowed herself to examine the possibility that she had made a terrible mistake. She pressed her ear to Priya's belly again, listening for the baby's heartbeat. When she found it, the rhythm was so slow and weak that ice formed in her stomach. Both mother and child were dying, and all of her experience seemed useless against whatever was happening inside Priya's body. Dawn was breaking when Ravi returned with the physician, a middle-aged man named Dr. Kumar, who carried a leather satchel filled with instruments Savita had never seen before. His clothes were dusty from the hard journey, but his hands were clean and his manner calm. He examined Priya quickly but thoroughly, using methods that seemed strange to Savita. He listened to the baby's heartbeat through a wooden tube, felt carefully around Priya's belly, and checked the dilation with gentle precision. "The baby's cord is wrapped around its neck," he said quietly. "Each contraction tightens the cord like a noose, which is why the heartbeat is so weak. The mother's exhaustion has made her contractions ineffective, so the baby cannot move past the cord to be born normally." Savita had heard of cord complications, but had never encountered one herself. "What can be done?" she asked, her pride finally crumbling before the reality of death approaching. "I need to reach inside and try to slip the cord over the baby's head," Dr. Kumar replied. "It's dangerous for both mother and child, but without intervention, both will certainly die within hours." He opened his satchel and withdrew instruments Savita had never imagined. Thin metal tools designed for reaching inside the birth canal, hooks for gently moving tissue, clamps for controlling bleeding. His knowledge came not just from experience but from books, from the accumulated wisdom of physicians who had faced similar crises and recorded their solutions. Working with infinite care, Dr. Kumar managed to locate the cord and guide it over the baby's head. The procedure was delicate and precise, requiring knowledge of anatomy that Savita's traditional training had never included. Within minutes of freeing the cord, Priya's contractions resumed with renewed strength. The baby was born an hour later, a healthy girl who cried lustily as she took her first breath. Priya, though weak from her ordeal, opened her eyes and smiled when her daughter was placed in her arms. Both mother and child lived, but barely. Dr. Kumar explained that another few hours of delay would have cost both lives. The baby's brain had already been deprived of oxygen for so long that only time would tell if there had been lasting damage. As Dr. Kumar packed his instruments, he spoke gently to Savita. "Your reputation as a skilled midwife is well deserved," he said. "But no single person can know everything about the complexities of birth. This type of cord complication requires specific interventions that traditional midwifery doesn't teach. There is no shame in recognizing the limits of any individual's knowledge." Savita looked at Priya holding her baby, alive because she had finally allowed another healer to help. Her pride had nearly cost 2 lives. If Ravi had not insisted on seeking additional help, if she had continued to refuse collaboration, both mother and child would have died while she clung to her certainty that experience alone was sufficient. "I thought I knew enough," she whispered. "I thought my success meant I had learned all there was to learn." "Experience is valuable, Doctor," Kumar replied. "But it can also blind us to possibilities we haven't encountered before. The wisest healers are those who remain humble before the mysteries they don't yet understand." In the months that followed, Savita began to change her practice. She sought out other healers, learning new techniques and sharing her own knowledge. She invited Dr. Kumar to visit her village regularly, teaching her about complications she had never seen. She encouraged families to seek multiple opinions when births became difficult, recognizing that different types of knowledge could complement each other. Most importantly, she began to teach her apprentices that confidence without humility was dangerous. "Trust your experience," she would tell them. "But never stop learning. Never assume that what you know today is all you will ever need to know." Years later, when other midwives asked about her remarkable record of successful deliveries, Savita would always mention the night when her pride nearly killed Priya and her baby. "My greatest success," she would say, "was learning when to admit I needed help." This story shows us how confidence can become pride, and pride can blind us to our limitations. Savita discovered that even great skill and experience have boundaries, and that true wisdom lies in recognizing those boundaries before others pay the price for our blindness. Buddhism teaches that clinging to our sense of expertise, our identity as someone who knows, can prevent us from seeing clearly when situations require fresh eyes and different knowledge. When we remain open to learning from others, we serve those who depend on us more faithfully than when we insist on the sufficiency of our own understanding. Let us breathe gently here, feeling the wisdom of these teachings settling into our hearts. There is nothing you need to prove, nothing you must defend. Allow your breath to flow naturally, connecting you to this moment of learning and rest. We will explore another story, this one about a merchant named Devi, who believed that small deceptions in business caused no real harm to anyone. There once lived a grain merchant named Devi in a prosperous trading city where caravans from many regions came to buy and sell their goods. She had inherited her business from her father, along with his reputation for honest dealing and fair weights. Her shop stood in the heart of the marketplace, its wide doors opening onto sacks of rice, wheat, millet, and barley that drew customers from across the surrounding countryside. Devi understood the rhythms of trade, when to buy grain from farmers after harvest, when to store it safely through the wet season, when to sell as supplies grew scarce and prices rose. Her father had taught her to treat each transaction as sacred, to give full measure, to inspect her grain carefully for quality, and to speak truthfully about what she offered for sale. Trust, her father had said, is the foundation of all commerce. Customers return to merchants they can rely upon. Break that trust, and you may profit once, but lose forever. For the first few years after her father's death, Devi followed his teachings exactly. She used the certified scales that the city's trade guild inspected monthly. She sorted her grain carefully, keeping the finest quality separate from grain that was older or less perfect. She told customers honestly when supplies were running low, or when she expected prices to change. But as Devi grew more experienced in trade, she began to notice opportunities her father's strict honesty had caused him to miss. When customers were unfamiliar with current market prices, she could charge more than the standard rate, and they would pay without question. When people bought grain in small quantities for home use, they rarely weighed her measures against certified standards. The city's trade guild required all merchants to use official weights and measures, but they only inspected each shop once or twice per year. Between inspections, a merchant could use slightly lighter weights and heavier measures, selling less while appearing to give full measure, and the difference would be nearly impossible for individual customers to detect. Devi told herself that such small adjustments harmed no one significantly. If she gave 95% of full measure instead of 100%, each customer lost only a tiny amount of grain. They received almost everything they paid for, and the small difference would never be missed in their daily cooking. Everyone expects merchants to make some profit, she reasoned. My customers are still getting good grain at reasonable prices. They leave satisfied with their purchases. Where is the harm in earning a little extra for my knowledge and service? She began by making tiny adjustments to her scales, adding small amounts of wax to the bottoms of her standard weights, so they would register as heavier than they actually were. The difference was barely noticeable, perhaps 5%, but over hundreds of transactions each month, it added up to significant additional profit. Next, she began mixing small amounts of older grain with her premium supplies, not enough to spoil the quality noticeably, but enough to stretch her expensive stock further while still commanding top prices. A handful of last year's rice mixed into this year's harvest looked identical to most buyers. She also started giving optimistic estimates when customers asked about grain storage. This rice will keep fresh for at least a year, she would tell them, knowing that 6 months was more realistic for proper storage in most home conditions. By the time the grain began to deteriorate, customers would assume they had stored it improperly rather than blame the merchant who sold it to them. These practices increased Devi's profits substantially. She was able to expand her shop, hire 2 assistants, and begin dealing in more expensive varieties of grain. Her business appeared to thrive, and other merchants began asking for her advice about successful trading methods. But grain is essential to life, and Devi's customers depended on her honesty in ways she had not fully considered. The families who bought rice from her fed it to their children every day. The bakers who purchased wheat from her used it to make bread that hungry people relied upon for basic nourishment. The farmers who bought seed grain from her planted it with the expectation that it would grow into crops they could harvest and sell. When Devi gave short measure, families ran out of rice sooner than expected. Mothers would count carefully, planning meals to last until they could afford to buy more grain, only to find their supplies exhausted with several days remaining before their husbands received their next wages. Children went hungry, while parents worked extra hours to earn money for emergency grain purchases. When she mixed old grain with new, the storage life was shorter than customers expected. Families who bought large quantities, planning to store grain for months, discovered weevils and mold appearing much sooner than Devi had promised. The grain they had bought as security against future hunger became unusable, forcing them to throw away food they could not afford to waste. When she sold poor seed grain mixed with good, farmers planted fields expecting normal yields, but harvested less than the amount needed to feed their families and repay the loans they had taken to buy the seed in the first place. Failed harvests meant debt, and debt meant families lost their land or went hungry through the following year. Devi noticed none of these consequences directly. Her customers did not return to complain about short measures, spoiled grain, or failed crops because they assumed such problems were their own fault. Poor storage, bad luck with weather, mistakes in farming technique. The connection between their troubles and her deceptions remained invisible to everyone, including Devi herself. Let us pause and breathe gently here. Feel your body resting, your breath moving naturally without effort. These teachings carry weight, but you need not carry them as burden. Simply allow them to settle like water finding its level in your heart. The true cost of Devi's deceptions became clear during a year when the monsoon failed and grain became scarce throughout the region. Harvests were poor, and many families faced the prospect of hunger during the months before new crops could be planted and grown. During such times, every grain of rice mattered. The difference between having enough food and going hungry could be measured in handfuls. Families calculated their supplies carefully, rationing their grain to last until the next harvest season. Bakshi was one of Devi's regular customers, a potter who worked long hours to earn enough money to feed his wife and 3 young children. When grain prices rose due to the failed harvest, he saved for weeks to buy a large sack of rice that would, by his careful calculations, provide his family's basic meals for 2 months. Bakshi brought his savings to Devi's shop and purchased what he believed was a full measure of premium rice. But because of Devi's modified weights, he received only 95% of what he paid for. Because the grain included older rice mixed with new, its storage life was shorter than Devi had promised. Because the quality was slightly lower than advertised, it provided less nourishment per handful than Bakshi had calculated. 2 weeks before the next harvest, Bakshi's rice ran out. His family had been eating carefully measured portions, stretching their supply as far as possible, but the grain disappeared sooner than it should have. With no money left for another purchase and no credit available from merchants, Bakshi faced the terrible choice between watching his children go hungry or taking desperate measures to find food. He decided to steal grain from the fields of a wealthy landowner, planning to take only enough to feed his family until harvest time. Bakshi was not a criminal by nature. He was a skilled craftsman who had always earned his living through honest work. But hunger drives people to actions they would never consider under normal circumstances. The landowner caught Bakshi filling a small bag with unharvested grain. Under the region's laws, stealing food during times of scarcity was considered a serious crime because it threatened the survival of entire communities. The penalty was severe: public whipping followed by exile from the city. Bakshi received 30 lashes in the marketplace while his wife and children watched. The beating left him unable to work for weeks, and the exile forced his family to leave behind their home, his pottery wheel, and all the connections that had sustained their livelihood. They became wanderers, moving from village to village, begging for work and shelter. Without Bakshi's pottery skills generating income, without a permanent home, without the support network that had helped them survive previous difficult times, the family's situation became desperate. Bakshi's wife, weakened by poor nutrition and the stress of homelessness, fell ill with fever. Without money for medicine or a safe place to rest, her condition worsened rapidly. She died in a roadside shelter, leaving Bakshi to care for 3 young children alone. The children, malnourished and exposed to harsh weather without adequate shelter, succumbed one by one to illnesses that proper food and housing might have prevented. Within a year of Bakshi's theft, his entire family was dead, and he had disappeared into the anonymous mass of beggars and outcasts who survived on the margins of society. Devi never learned of Bakshi's fate. She knew that he had been caught stealing and exiled, but she never connected his crime to her business practices. The chain of causation, her short measures leading to his early shortage, leading to his desperate theft, leading to his family's destruction, remained invisible to her. But the Buddha, who happened to be staying in the city during this time, observed the entire sequence of events. When some merchants asked him about the ethics of small deceptions in trade, he told them Bakshi's story. "You believe that minor dishonesty in weights and measures causes no significant harm," the Buddha said. "But consider how small shortages combine with other difficulties to push people toward desperate choices. The merchant who gives short measure may never see the beggar who resulted from her deception, but the connection exists nonetheless." He continued, "When you promise full measure but give less, you do not simply steal a small amount of grain. You steal the security that families depend upon for planning their survival. When parents calculate how long their food will last, they trust that merchants have given them what was promised. Your deception transforms their careful planning into miscalculation that may cost them everything." The merchants who heard this teaching began to examine their own practices more carefully. Some, like Devi, had convinced themselves that small deceptions harmed no one. Others had never considered how their individual dishonesty might contribute to the larger problems of poverty and desperation in their community. This story shows us how small deceptions create suffering far beyond what we can see. Devi discovered that cheating customers by tiny amounts could set in motion a chain of consequences leading to exile, illness, and death. Buddhism teaches that there are no purely private actions. Our choices ripple outward through the web of interconnection that binds all beings together. When we take more than we deserve or give less than we promise, we disturb the fabric of trust that holds communities together and makes survival possible for families who live close to the margins. Take a gentle breath here and allow these teachings to settle into your understanding. Feel your body supported, your mind at rest. There is nothing you need to solve right now, nothing you must carry as burden. Simply breathe and be present with this wisdom. Let us explore one more story in this teaching, following a teacher named Arjun, who believed that small lies told to protect his reputation would harm no one. There once lived a teacher named Arjun in a village school where children from farming families came to learn reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. He had studied in the regional capital for 3 years, learning from scholars who had themselves been trained in the great centers of learning. His knowledge was real, his dedication sincere, and his love for his students genuine. The village had been fortunate to attract a teacher of Arjun's caliber. Most rural schools could only afford local men who had learned basic literacy, but lacked formal training in teaching methods or advanced subjects. Arjun brought real expertise to his position, and parents were grateful that their children could receive quality education without leaving home. But Arjun's actual qualifications, while solid, were not quite as impressive as the village believed them to be. When he had first applied for the position, he had exaggerated slightly about his training, claiming to have studied for 4 years instead of 3, and mentioning association with a prestigious academy where he had actually only attended a few public lectures. These small exaggerations had helped him secure the job over other candidates. The village council wanted the most qualified teacher they could find, and Arjun's enhanced credentials made their choice seem clear. Once hired, he felt obligated to maintain the fiction rather than disappoint people who had trusted him. The lies were small, he told himself. My actual knowledge is good enough to teach these children well. The extra year of study I claimed wouldn't have taught me much more than I already know. Really, I'm giving them what they expected, even if my exact background is slightly different from what I described. Arjun proved to be an effective teacher. His students learned to read fluently and write clearly. They mastered arithmetic and developed curiosity about the wider world beyond their village. Parents were pleased with their children's progress and proud that their school had attracted such a learned instructor. But maintaining his false credentials required ongoing deception. When parents asked about his training, he had to remember which academy he had supposedly attended and for how long. When other teachers visited from nearby villages, he had to pretend familiarity with institutions and professors he had never actually encountered. More problematically, the villagers' high opinion of his credentials led them to ask for help with problems that stretched beyond his actual expertise. When the village council needed someone to write formal petitions to government officials, they asked Arjun to compose documents in the elevated language style that his supposed prestigious education would have taught him. When disputes arose requiring knowledge of law or administrative procedure, they sought his advice, assuming his advanced training included such subjects. Arjun found himself constantly improvising, trying to meet expectations based on qualifications he didn't actually possess. Sometimes he succeeded through intelligence and careful guessing. Other times he made mistakes that he had to cover with additional lies or explanations. The pressure of maintaining his false image began to affect his teaching. Instead of focusing entirely on his students' needs, he spent mental energy managing his reputation, remembering his fabricated history, and projecting the persona of someone more educated than he actually was. Worse, his deception created a model of dishonesty that some of his brighter students began to notice and emulate. Children are keen observers of adult behavior, and several of Arjun's pupils picked up on subtle signs that their teacher was not entirely truthful about his background. If their respected teacher could enhance his qualifications with small lies, these students reasoned, perhaps they could improve their own standing through similar exaggerations. Some began claiming to have read books they had only heard about, or understanding concepts they had barely grasped, or completing assignments they had actually rushed through carelessly. The culture of the school slowly shifted. Instead of honest inquiry and acknowledgement of what they didn't know, students began performing knowledge they didn't possess and avoiding admission of confusion or ignorance. Learning became less about genuine understanding and more about appearing educated. This change was subtle but profound. In a true learning environment, students feel safe to ask questions, make mistakes, and admit when they don't understand something. But when the teacher models dishonesty about his own knowledge, students learn to hide their ignorance rather than address it. The effects spread beyond the classroom. Some of Arjun's students went on to apprenticeships in various trades, carrying with them the lesson that small deceptions about qualifications were acceptable. A few who had shown particular academic promise were sent to regional schools for advanced training, where their habit of exaggerating their preparation led to difficulties with more demanding coursework. One student, a bright girl named Kamala, had learned from Arjun's example that claiming expertise she didn't possess was a useful strategy. When she began training as a midwife's assistant in a nearby town, She exaggerated her knowledge of herbs and birthing procedures, not wanting to appear ignorant compared to other apprentices. Her false confidence led the experienced midwife to trust her with responsibilities she wasn't ready to handle. During a difficult delivery, Kamala's inexperience contributed to complications that endangered both mother and child. The situation was resolved safely only because the senior midwife recognized the danger and intervened quickly, but the incident could easily have had tragic consequences. Meanwhile, in Arjun's village, the consequences of his deception eventually surfaced in an unexpected way. A government inspector arrived to evaluate the school and certify that it met official standards for receiving continued funding. The inspector had been trained at the same prestigious academy that Arjun had falsely claimed to attend. During their conversation, inconsistencies in Arjun's descriptions of the institution quickly became apparent. The inspector realized that Arjun had never actually studied where he claimed to have been educated. Rather than expose Arjun immediately, the inspector decided to test the quality of education the students were actually receiving. He examined their work, questioned them about their studies, and observed several lessons. To his surprise, he found that despite Arjun's false credentials, the actual teaching was quite good. The students were well prepared and genuinely engaged with their learning. But the inspector also noticed the subtle dishonesty that had infected the school culture. Students exaggerated their knowledge, avoided admitting confusion, and seemed more concerned with appearing educated than with learning deeply. The foundation of honest inquiry that true education requires had been undermined by the teacher's modeling of deception. The inspector faced a difficult decision. Arjun was actually a competent teacher whose removal would harm the student's education, but his lies about credentials had created legal problems for the school's certification and had corrupted the learning environment in ways that would affect students long after they left the classroom. Let us rest here in this moment, breathing gently as these teachings settle in our hearts. Feel your body supported, your breath flowing naturally. There is nothing you need to figure out right now, no problem you must solve. Simply be present with this wisdom that has been shared across centuries by those who learned through their own mistakes and discoveries. The inspector decided to speak privately with Arjun before taking official action. That evening, he visited the teacher at his home, away from the school and students. "I know you did not attend the academy you claim on your credentials," the inspector said gently. "Your actual training is evident in the quality of your teaching, but the deception creates serious problems that extend far beyond your personal situation." Arjun's face flushed with shame, but he tried to maintain his fiction one last time. "I'm not sure what you mean. Perhaps there's been some confusion about—" "Please," the inspector interrupted kindly. "I was a student at that academy for 6 years. I know every professor, every building, every tradition you claim to remember. Your descriptions come from hearsay, not experience. But that's not what concerns me most." The inspector continued. "What troubles me is how your deception has shaped your students. They've learned to perform knowledge rather than seek it honestly. They've absorbed the lesson that small lies about qualifications are acceptable. Some will carry this pattern into their future work, where the consequences could be severe." He told Arjun about similar cases he had encountered, teachers whose false credentials had eventually led their students into dangerous situations when those students overestimated their own preparation for advanced training or professional responsibilities. "Your lie seemed small to you," the inspector said. "But lies about knowledge and qualifications ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. The student who learns from your example that exaggerating expertise is acceptable may someday claim medical knowledge she doesn't possess, or engineering skills that aren't adequate for the project she undertakes. Arjun sat in silence, finally understanding the full weight of his deception. He had focused on whether his actual knowledge was sufficient to teach his current students well, but he had never considered how his dishonesty about credentials was teaching them the truth was optional when it served their interests. "What should I do?" he asked quietly. "Tell the truth," the inspector replied, "to the village council, to the parents, and especially to your students. Show them that integrity matters more than reputation, that admitting error is stronger than maintaining fiction." The next day, Arjun called a meeting of the entire village. With his students and their parents gathered, he confessed his deception about his credentials. He explained how his lies had begun, why he had maintained them, and what he had learned about the consequences of dishonesty in positions of trust. "I told myself that small lies about my background would harm no one," he said. "But I see now that I was teaching you all, that truth is less important than reputation, that maintaining false impressions is acceptable if it serves our purposes. This lesson could follow you into situations where such dishonesty creates real danger." Some parents were angry about being deceived. Others were disappointed that their children's teacher had not been as qualified as they believed. But many were moved by Arjun's honesty and his willingness to face the consequences of his actions. The village council voted to keep Arjun as their teacher, recognizing that his actual qualifications, while less prestigious than claimed, were still adequate for their needs. More importantly, they valued the lesson he had taught their children about taking responsibility for mistakes and choosing truth over convenience. Arjun's confession transformed the culture of the school. Students began asking questions more freely, admitting confusion without shame, and focusing on genuine understanding rather than performing knowledge they didn't possess. The foundation of honest inquiry was restored, creating better conditions for real learning. Years later, when some of his former students had become teachers themselves, they would tell their own pupils about the day their teacher chose truth over reputation. "He showed us," they would say, "that admitting our limitations is the beginning of wisdom, and that lies about knowledge are among the most dangerous lies of all." This story shows us how deception about our qualifications corrupts the very relationships where honesty matters most. Arjun discovered that lies about knowledge teach others that truth is optional, creating patterns of dishonesty that can lead to dangerous situations when people overestimate their preparation for critical responsibilities. Buddhism teaches that right speech includes being truthful about our abilities and limitations, especially when others depend on our expertise. When we inflate our credentials, we not only deceive others about what they can expect from us, we model dishonesty for everyone who looks to us as an example. Let us pause here and breathe deeply, feeling these teachings settling like water into the ground of our understanding. Allow your shoulders to soften, your breath to flow naturally. There is nothing you need to defend, no image you must maintain. Simply rest in this moment of quiet learning. Now let us return to Natan, the cloth dyer, whose story began our journey tonight, and see how the consequences of his choices continued to unfold. The physician who examined Natan's children confirmed what the village healer had suspected. They were suffering from poisoning, likely from contaminated water. Their recovery would be slow, requiring careful attention to their diet and plenty of clean water to help their bodies eliminate the toxins. Natan arranged for water to be carried daily from a spring high in the mountains, far from any human activity. The expense was considerable, but his children's health mattered more than money. As they gradually grew stronger, drinking only the purest water available, Natan began to trace the path his waste had taken through the water system. Rivers, he learned, are not simple channels flowing in one direction. They are part of vast networks, streams feeding rivers, rivers feeding larger rivers, water evaporating to form clouds that rain into watersheds that feed back into the same system. What he had poured into the water above his village had become part of a cycle that touched every source of water in the region. Moreover, the water system didn't recognize the boundaries humans drew on their maps. Political borders, property lines, village territories, none of these meant anything to flowing water. His dyes had traveled through multiple jurisdictions, affecting people who had no way of knowing where the contamination originated and no power to stop it. Natan began visiting villages downstream from his own, ostensibly as a traveling merchant, but actually to observe the effects of water pollution he suspected he had caused. What he found horrified him. In the first village downstream, fishing had become unreliable. The fish were smaller than in previous years, and many showed signs of sickness, lesions on their skin, deformed fins, behavior that seemed sluggish and confused. Fishermen who had fed their families from the river for generations were now forced to seek other work or travel to distant, unpolluted waters. In the farming village beyond that, crop yields had declined mysteriously over the past year. The rice paddies, which depended on river water for irrigation, were producing rice with strange colors and bitter tastes. Some fields had failed entirely, their plants withering despite adequate water and attention from experienced farmers. Further downstream, in a town that drew its drinking water directly from the river, people were reporting increased rates of stomach ailments, skin rashes, and a persistent weakness that the local healers could not identify or treat. Children seemed particularly affected, with many showing the same symptoms Natan's own children had suffered. The pattern was clear and devastating. His dye waste, multiplied by months of regular dumping, had created a plume of contamination that followed the water downstream, affecting everyone who depended on the river for drinking, farming, or fishing. But the most terrible discovery was yet to come. In the coastal town where the river met the sea, Natan learned of a fishing family whose tragedy mirrored his own situation perfectly. The fisherman, whose name was Karen, had 3 children and a wife who was expecting their 4th child. They lived simply but happily, earning their living from the sea and the estuary where the river delivered its flow to the ocean. Karen's nets brought in fish. His wife gathered shellfish from the tidal pools, and their children played in the shallow waters where river and sea mixed together. When the contaminated river water reached the estuary, it created conditions that were toxic to the shellfish that Karan's wife, Nalini, gathered for food. The chemicals in Natan's dyes, concentrated by months of dumping and carried hundreds of miles by the flowing water, accumulated in the tissues of mussels and clams that filtered the water for their own survival. Nalini, pregnant and needing extra nourishment, ate these contaminated shellfish regularly, not knowing that they carried toxins that could harm her unborn child. The poisons that had originated in Natan's dye vats, transformed by their journey through the water system, crossed the barrier of Nalini's womb and affected the developing baby. When the child was born, it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The baby boy lived only 3 days, his small body unable to cope with the toxins that had affected his development. The local midwife had never seen birth defects quite like those the child displayed, and she could offer no explanation for what had caused them. Karan and Nalini grieved their lost son, while never knowing that his death had been caused by dye waste poured into a river hundreds of miles away by a cloth worker they would never meet. The connection between Natan's choice to dump his waste directly into the water and this family's tragedy was invisible to everyone involved. Natan learned of this death through conversations with other merchants who traveled the coastal routes. They spoke of it as a sad but inexplicable loss, one of those tragedies that sometimes befell families without apparent cause. None of them connected it to upstream pollution or considered that human choices made far away might have contributed to the baby's death. But Natan, now understanding how water systems work and how contamination spreads, recognized the terrible possibility that his actions might have contributed to this child's death and his family's grief. The timeline matched. The location was correct. The symptoms were consistent with the type of chemical poisoning his dyes could cause. He would never know with absolute certainty that his waste had killed Karan and Nalini's baby. Water pollution comes from many sources, and birth defects have many possible causes. But the possibility was real enough to fill him with a grief almost as deep as what he had felt watching his own children suffer. Standing on the beach where the contaminated river met the sea, Natan understood at last the true meaning of interconnection. The water flowing past his workshop connected him intimately with thousands of people he would never meet, living in villages whose names he didn't know, depending on the same water system for their survival and livelihood. His choice to dump dye waste directly into the river had seemed private and harmless because its effects were invisible to him. But privacy is an illusion when our actions enter systems that connect us to others. The river had carried his choices far beyond his sight, delivering consequences to families who had no way to protect themselves from his decisions. Let us breathe gently here, allowing these difficult truths to settle without overwhelming us. Feel your breath connecting you to this moment, to this teaching, to the understanding that grows even in darkness. There is nothing you must fix right now, nothing you need to solve. Simply be present with this wisdom. Natan's understanding of his responsibility expanded even further when he began to research the broader effects of water pollution on the communities that depended on his river system. What he discovered made him realize that individual actions, when multiplied across many people making similar choices, create problems far larger than any single person could imagine. He was not the only artisan dumping waste into the river. Upstream from his village, other dyers, tanners, metalworkers, and various craftspeople were all taking advantage of the same convenient disposal method. Each individual believed, as Natan had, that their small contribution would be harmlessly diluted by the vast volume of flowing water. But the river's capacity to absorb and neutralize waste was limited. Like a person who can process small amounts of poison safely, but becomes sick when the dose exceeds their body's ability to cope. The river system had reached a point where it could no longer handle the cumulative load of waste being poured into it. The effects were accelerating. What had begun as subtle changes, slightly off-tasting fish, minor crop problems, occasional stomach upsets, was developing into a crisis that threatened the survival of entire communities downstream. Villages that had existed for centuries, supported by clean water and healthy fishing, were beginning to empty as families fled to regions where the water was still safe. Farmland that had been productive for generations was being abandoned as irrigation from the polluted river made crops inedible. Economic networks that had sustained thousands of people were collapsing as the foundation of clean water disappeared. Natan realized that his individual decision to dump waste had been part of a collective disaster. He could not claim sole responsibility for the crisis, but neither could he claim innocence. Every person who had made the same choice to prioritize convenience over environmental responsibility had contributed to a catastrophe that no single person intended or wanted. This understanding led him to a deeper recognition. Individual responsibility does not disappear when it becomes part of collective action. The fact that others were also polluting the water did not reduce his own culpability. Each person's contribution to the problem was real and significant, regardless of how many others were making similar contributions. Natan began to see parallels everywhere. When merchants collectively agreed to give short measure, the result was widespread hunger that no individual merchant had intended. When craftspeople collectively cut corners on quality, the result was a general breakdown in trust and safety that harmed everyone. When individuals collectively chose convenience over responsibility, the cumulative effect was catastrophic, even though each person's individual impact seemed negligible. I thought my small action would disappear into the vastness of the world, he reflected, but I was wrong about how the world works. Small actions don't disappear. They combine with other small actions to create large consequences that no one intended, but everyone helped to cause. This insight transformed not only Natan's understanding of his own choices, but his sense of connection to other people. He was not an isolated individual whose private actions stayed private. He was part of a web of relationships and interdependence where his choices inevitably affected others and where others' choices inevitably affected him. The water system that carried his waste downstream also carried upstream influences to him. When people above his village made irresponsible choices about waste disposal, the effects flowed to his community. When communities below his village suffered from pollution, their economic problems eventually affected the entire regional network of trade and commerce that his own livelihood depended upon. He was simultaneously responsible for effects downstream and vulnerable to choices made upstream. This double relationship, being both agent and recipient of others' actions, made individual responsibility more complex, but not less real. Natan decided that his response to this understanding had to be as interconnected as the problem itself. It was not enough to simply stop dumping his own waste into the river, though that was certainly necessary. He also needed to work with others to address the collective crisis that individual irresponsibility had created. He began by confessing his role in the pollution problem to his own village council. This confession was difficult because it required admitting that his increased prosperity over recent months had come from practices that harmed others. His neighbors were shocked to learn that someone they trusted and respected had been secretly contributing to problems they all faced. But Natan's honesty about his own mistakes gave him credibility when he proposed solutions. He offered to fund the construction of proper waste treatment facilities that would allow dyers and other craftspeople to dispose of their chemicals safely. He volunteered to travel to other villages at his own expense to discuss the water pollution problem and coordinate regional responses. Most importantly, he committed to changing his own practices, even though doing so would reduce his profits significantly. He returned to the labor-intensive waste disposal methods his grandfather had taught him, digging proper treatment pits and waiting for appropriate seasons to dispose of different types of chemical waste. The improvement in his own practices began immediately, but the healing of the water system would take much longer. Pollution that had accumulated over months of irresponsible dumping would need years to work its way through the river system. Communities that had been damaged by contaminated water would need time and resources to recover their health and rebuild their economic foundations. Natan understood that some consequences of his actions could never be undone. Karan and Nalini's baby would never be restored to life. Families who had lost their livelihoods to pollution-induced fishing and farming failures might never fully recover their former prosperity. Communities that had been forced to relocate due to water contamination might never return to their ancestral homes. The permanence of some consequences was perhaps the most difficult aspect of his awakening to interconnection. In systems where all beings are connected through networks of mutual dependence, harmful actions create ripples that can never be completely called back. The suffering caused spreads outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water, eventually touching shores we cannot see and affecting lives we will never know about. But this understanding also revealed the positive potential of responsible action. Just as harmful choices ripple outward to create suffering, beneficial choices ripple outward to create healing and support. Every decision to act with consideration for others' welfare contributes to networks of mutual care that strengthen the whole system. Natan's commitment to proper waste disposal, multiplied by similar commitments from other craftspeople he influenced, began to reduce the pollution entering the water system. His funding of treatment facilities enabled others to dispose of waste responsibly, even when they lacked resources to build their own systems. His willingness to travel and teach others about water systems helped communities understand their connection to upstream and downstream neighbors. These positive ripples moved through the same networks that had carried his harmful waste, but now carrying healing instead of poison. Villages that had been damaged by pollution began to see improvements in their water quality. Fish populations started to recover. Crops grown with cleaner irrigation water became healthier and more productive. The healing was slow and incomplete, but it was real. Natan's recognition of his interconnection with all beings affected by the water system had motivated actions that contributed to collective recovery rather than collective harm. Take a moment now to breathe gently, feeling these teachings settle into your understanding like water soaking into dry ground. Allow your body to soften, your mind to rest. There is nothing you need to carry as burden. No weight you must bear alone. Simply breathe and be present with this wisdom that connects us all. We have traveled far tonight in our exploration of consequence and connection. We have seen how small actions ripple outward through networks we cannot see, touching lives we will never meet, returning to us in forms we never expected. We have learned that there are no purely private choices when we live in systems of mutual dependence. Let us continue our journey with one final story, following a young woman named Priya, who believed that small acts of kindness, like small acts of harm, would disappear without lasting effect. There once lived a young woman named Priya, who worked as a seamstress in a busy market town where merchants and travelers passed through daily on their journeys between distant cities. She had learned her craft from her aunt, developing skilled fingers that could create fine embroidery and mend torn cloth with stitches so neat they were nearly invisible. Priya's work brought her into contact with many people: farmers who needed patches sewn onto work clothes, merchants who required travel garments repaired, mothers who brought their children's outgrown clothing to be altered for younger siblings. Each day, dozens of small interactions filled her workshop with the quiet conversations that accompany careful handwork. She was naturally kind-hearted, inclined to help others when she could do so without great inconvenience to herself. When customers seemed rushed, she would work a little faster to have their items ready sooner than promised. When someone appeared to be struggling financially, she might charge slightly less than her usual rates. When children accompanied their parents to her shop, she would offer them small scraps of colorful fabric to play with while the adults conducted their business. These small kindnesses felt natural to Priya, like breathing or walking, actions so automatic that she barely noticed herself doing them. She didn't think of herself as particularly generous or charitable. She simply responded to the needs she saw around her with whatever help seemed appropriate and manageable. But Priya had grown up hearing stories about great acts of generosity and heroic self-sacrifice that changed the course of history or saved entire communities from disaster. Against such dramatic examples, her small daily kindnesses seemed insignificant, drops of water in an ocean, too tiny to matter in any meaningful way. What difference do my small gestures make? She would wonder sometimes as she worked alone in her shop. I help people save a few coins or finish their errands a little sooner, but these are such minor benefits. Real kindness would be dramatic acts that transform lives completely. This perspective made her occasionally impatient with her own impulses toward helpfulness. When she felt moved to offer assistance, she would sometimes hold back, thinking that such small gestures were hardly worth the effort. Why charge less for a repair job that would save the customer only a few copper coins? Why work extra hours to finish something early when the customer could simply wait another day? She began to see her kind impulses as somewhat naive, the instincts of someone who didn't understand how little impact small actions could have in the vast complexity of other people's lives. Real problems required substantial solutions, not tiny gestures of consideration. Gradually, Priya began restraining her natural generosity. Not completely, she remained a decent and fair person in her business dealings, but she stopped going out of her way to help others. She charged standard rates regardless of customers' circumstances, finished work according to promised schedules rather than trying to accommodate urgent needs, and kept her interactions businesslike rather than personally warm. "I'm being realistic," she told herself. "Small kindnesses don't change anything important. I should focus my energy on my own work and leave other people to solve their own problems." This shift in her approach was subtle enough that most customers didn't notice any dramatic change in her service. She remained competent and reliable. Her work was still high quality and fairly priced. The difference was in the margins, the extra attention, the flexible timing, the small accommodations that had previously made her shop a particularly welcoming place. But kindness, like water, has effects that flow in directions we cannot always trace. The small acts of consideration that Priya had stopped offering had been creating ripples of positive consequence that extended far beyond her immediate awareness. One of her regular customers was an elderly man named Mohan, who brought his late wife's saris to be altered into household items, pillowcases, small bags, chair cushions, that allowed him to keep her memory present in his daily life. The fabric held sentimental value far beyond its practical worth, and Priya had always treated these projects with special care. When Mohan brought fabric, Priya had previously spent extra time understanding exactly what he hoped to create and why it mattered to him. She would suggest modifications that would make the finished items more useful or beautiful, often without charging for the additional design work. Most importantly, she would listen patiently to his stories about his wife and their life together, recognizing that the conversation was as valuable to him as the sewing itself. After Priya became more businesslike in her approach, Mohan's visits became purely transactional. She still did good work for him, but she no longer asked about his intentions for each piece or offered suggestions for improvement. She listened politely but briefly to his stories, then redirected conversation back to the practical details of the sewing project. Mohan noticed the change, though he was too polite to comment on it directly. The seamstress was still competent and fair, but something warm had disappeared from their interactions. His visits to her shop had been among the few opportunities he had to share memories of his wife with someone who seemed genuinely interested. Without that connection, The process of transforming his wife's belongings felt lonelier and more mechanical. The loss of this small but meaningful relationship contributed to a growing sense of isolation that was affecting Mohan's health and spirits. His children lived far away, his neighbors were busy with their own families, and the simple human connection he had found in Priya's shop had been one of his few sources of regular social warmth. As Mohan became more depressed and withdrawn, he began neglecting his own care. He ate less regularly, kept his house less clean, and avoided the community activities that had previously kept him engaged with village life. The absence of one small weekly kindness, Priya's willingness to listen to his stories, had been part of a support network that helped maintain his will to live. Another customer whose life was affected by the change in Priya's approach was a young mother named Kavya, who brought her children's clothing for alterations as they grew. Kavya worked as a laborer in the grain fields, earning barely enough to feed her family and pay rent for their small room above a baker's shop. When her children outgrew their clothes, Kavya couldn't afford to buy new garments. Instead, she would bring the old clothes to Priya to be altered. Pants lengthened, shirts enlarged, seams adjusted to accommodate growth. Previously, Priya had recognized how carefully Kavya budgeted these alterations and had quietly charged her less than the work was worth. The reduced prices had made it possible for Kavya to keep her children properly clothed without going into debt or sacrificing food money. The savings were small from Priya's perspective, but crucial from Kavya's. The difference between managing month to month and falling behind on essential expenses. When Priya stopped offering these discounts, Kavya found herself facing impossible choices. She could pay full price for clothing alterations and feed her children less, or she could try to modify the clothes herself and risk ruining garments that couldn't be replaced. Kavya chose to attempt the alterations herself, working by candlelight after her children were asleep, using skills she didn't really possess. The results were poor: crooked seams, uneven hems, patches that looked clumsy and obvious. Her children began to feel ashamed of their appearance, especially when they compared their clothing to that of classmates whose families could afford better. The shame affected their performance in school and their willingness to participate in activities with other children. They became more withdrawn and less confident, changes that their teacher noticed but couldn't fully explain. The loss of Priya's small kindness had set in motion a chain of consequences that was affecting the children's education and social development. A third person whose life was touched by Priya's decision to withhold small kindnesses was a traveling merchant named Basu, who passed through the town monthly with goods from the capital city. His business required careful timing, arriving at markets when demand was high, maintaining relationships with local traders who could help him sell his goods quickly. Basu's clothing took heavy wear from constant travel, and he depended on finding reliable seamstresses in each town along his route who could repair tears and replace buttons quickly so he could maintain a professional appearance. Previously, when Basu brought urgent repair work to Priya, she had been willing to work late into the evening to have his clothes ready for an early morning departure. This accommodation had been crucial to Basu's ability to maintain his schedule and his business relationships. When merchants look shabby or unprofessional, customers lose confidence in the quality of their goods. The quick repairs that allowed Basu to present himself well had directly supported his livelihood. After Priya stopped providing expedited service, Basu found himself in several situations where clothing repairs weren't completed in time for important meetings. His appearance suffered, and some potential customers chose to buy from other merchants who seemed more prosperous and reliable. The loss of business forced Basu to take fewer risks on new merchandise and stick to selling only goods that he was certain would find buyers. This made his business less profitable, and his route through the region less valuable to the communities that depended on him to bring goods they couldn't obtain locally. Let us breathe gently here, feeling the connections that bind all beings together in webs of mutual support and dependence. Allow your breath to flow naturally, your body to rest. There is nothing you must solve right now, nothing you need to carry as burden. Priya remained unaware of these consequences because the effects of withholding kindness are often as invisible as the effects of offering it. Mohan didn't tell her that her changed behavior had contributed to his depression. Kavya didn't explain how the loss of discounts was affecting her family's clothing and her children's confidence. Basu didn't describe how the elimination of expedited service was hurting his business. From Priya's perspective, nothing significant had changed. Her customers still came to her shop, still paid for her services, still seemed satisfied with her work. The absence of small kindnesses didn't create dramatic crises that would have been obvious to her. It simply removed supports that had been helping people manage their daily struggles more successfully. But kindness and its absence both create networks of consequence that extend far beyond the original action. Just as Natan's pollution had traveled downstream to affect people he never met, Priya's withdrawn generosity was affecting people whose lives were connected to her customers in ways she couldn't see. Mohan's increasing isolation affected his relationship with his grandchildren, who lived in a neighboring village and visited him occasionally. When they found their grandfather more depressed and less engaged, they began to worry about his health and discussed with their parents whether he needed more care or supervision. These conversations created stress in Mohan's son's family as they debated whether to bring the elderly man to live with them or arrange for someone to check on him more frequently. The son's wife, already busy caring for her own children and managing household responsibilities, felt burdened by the prospect of additional caregiving duties. The family's worry about Mohan began affecting their own relationships and decisions. The son worked longer hours to save money in case his father needed expensive care. The daughter-in-law became less patient with her own children as she felt overwhelmed by mounting responsibilities. The grandchildren sensed the adult tension and began to feel anxious about visiting their grandfather. One small, withdrawn kindness, Priya's decision to stop listening warmly to Mohan's stories, was creating stress and conflict in multiple families connected to his life. Meanwhile, Kavya's children's struggles with poorly altered clothing were affecting their experience at school in ways that extended beyond their personal confidence. Their teacher, noticing that several children seemed withdrawn and ashamed of their appearance, began to worry about poverty levels in the community and whether some families needed additional support. The teacher spoke to the village council about organizing a clothing drive or fund to help families who seemed unable to properly clothe their children. This well-intentioned response required time and energy from community members who were already busy with their own responsibilities. The clothing drive did collect donations, but it also created a subtle stigma around receiving help that made some families reluctant to participate. Kavya, proud despite her poverty, felt embarrassed to be identified as someone whose children needed donated clothes. The help came with a social cost that the original small kindness, Priya's quiet discount, had avoided. More broadly, the teacher's concerns about child welfare led to increased scrutiny of family situations that were actually manageable with small supports, but looked problematic when those supports were removed. Well-meaning community members began to worry unnecessarily about problems that didn't require dramatic intervention, just the continuation of the informal networks of mutual aid that had previously kept families stable. Basu's business difficulties were also creating ripple effects throughout the regional trading network. As his route became less profitable, he began skipping some of the smaller villages that depended on traveling merchants for goods they couldn't produce locally. One of these villages had been buying cloth from basu that local women used to make clothes for their families. When he stopped including their village in his regular route, they had to travel farther to obtain the materials they needed or do without certain types of fabric altogether. The inconvenience was manageable for most families, but for elderly or disabled people who couldn't travel easily, the loss of basu's regular visits meant reduced access to necessities. Some began asking neighbors to make purchases for them, creating additional burdens on people who were already busy with their own responsibilities. The interconnected nature of trade relationships meant that basu's reduced success affected not only his own livelihood, but the economic network that supported multiple communities. One seamstress's decision to stop accommodating urgent repairs had contributed to changes in trading patterns that touched the lives of people in distant villages who had never heard of Priya. 6 months after Priya had begun restraining her natural generosity, a traveling monk arrived in her town. He was making a pilgrimage to various communities, teaching about compassion and the interconnectedness of all beings. The village council invited him to speak at the community gathering place, and most residents came to hear his teaching. The monk spoke about how small acts of kindness create networks of positive consequence that extend far beyond what we can see. He used the metaphor of a stone dropped into still water, creating rings that spread outward until they touch distant shores. You may believe that your small gestures of care and consideration disappear without lasting effect, the monk said. But kindness, like all actions, creates waves of consequence that travel through the web of relationships connecting all beings. The warm word you speak to a stranger may reach them at the moment they most need encouragement. The small discount you offer to someone struggling financially may be what allows their children to stay clothed and confident. The extra effort you make to complete work quickly may enable someone to maintain their livelihood and support their family. As Priya listened to these words, she began to reconsider her recent decision to withhold the small kindnesses that had once felt natural to her. She had been thinking about kindness as she thought about dramatic acts of heroism, either large enough to transform lives completely or too small to matter at all. But the monk's teaching suggested a different understanding. Perhaps small acts of kindness were like threads in a vast tapestry, each individual thread contributing to a pattern of mutual support that held communities together. No single thread created the entire design, but each thread was necessary for the fabric's strength and beauty. After the teaching, Priya walked through the market district, observing the interactions between vendors and customers, neighbors and strangers. She began to notice the countless small exchanges of consideration that made daily life more pleasant and manageable. A shopkeeper helping an elderly customer carry heavy purchases, a mother sharing fruit from her lunch with a hungry-looking child, a craftsman taking time to explain his work to someone who was genuinely curious about the process. These small kindnesses were so common that she had barely noticed them before. But now she could see how they created an atmosphere of mutual care that made the market feel like a community rather than just a place of business. People lingered to chat with vendors they liked, returned to shops where they had been treated well, and recommended businesses that had gone out of their way to help them. The network of small kindnesses was actually a form of social infrastructure, as important to the community's well-being as the roads that connected buildings or the wells that provided water. When people felt supported by others' consideration, they were more likely to offer consideration in return, creating cycles of mutual aid that benefited everyone. Priya began to understand that her small acts of kindness had been contributions to this infrastructure. When she charged Kavya less for alterations, she wasn't just helping one family. She was maintaining the community's commitment to ensuring that all children could attend school with dignity. When she listened warmly to Mohan's stories, she wasn't just providing companionship to one lonely man. She was modeling the kind of intergenerational care that helped elderly people remain connected to community life. When she worked late to finish Basu's repairs quickly, she wasn't just accommodating one customer, she was supporting the trading relationships that brought goods and opportunities to her entire region. The monk's teaching had revealed what economists and social scientists would later call positive externalities, beneficial effects that extend beyond the immediate participants in an action. Just as Natan's pollution had created negative externalities that spread downstream to harm people he never met, Priya's kindnesses had created positive externalities that spread outward to benefit people whose connection to her was invisible. This understanding transformed Priya's perspective on the significance of small actions. She realized that she had been making a category error, assuming that actions had to be large to be important, when in fact the most important actions were often small ones repeated consistently by many people. The health of any community depended more on the daily accumulation of small kindnesses than on occasional acts of dramatic generosity. Heroes who made great sacrifices captured attention and admiration, but societies were actually built and sustained by ordinary people making ordinary choices to treat each other with consideration and care. Priya decided to resume the practices of small kindness that had once felt natural to her. But now, instead of seeing these actions as insignificant gestures, she understood them as contributions to the social fabric that held her community together. She began offering Kavya discounts again. But this time she understood that she was participating in a community-wide effort to ensure that economic hardship didn't prevent children from participating fully in social life. She resumed listening warmly to Mohan's stories, recognizing that she was helping to maintain the networks of intergenerational connection that gave elderly people reasons to stay engaged with life. She returned to accommodating Basu's urgent needs, understanding that she was supporting the trading relationships that connected her community to the wider world and brought economic opportunities to local people. But her renewed kindness was different from her previous generosity, because it was now conscious and intentional rather than automatic. She understood why these small actions mattered and how they fitted into the larger patterns of mutual support that sustained community life. This conscious approach to kindness also helped Priya recognize opportunities for small generosity that she had previously missed. She began to see her work not just as a personal livelihood, but as a form of service to the community's well-being. Every interaction with a customer became a chance to contribute something positive to the social infrastructure that supported everyone's quality of life. Let us pause here and breathe deeply, feeling the wisdom of interconnection settling into our hearts. Allow your shoulders to release, your jaw to soften. There is nothing you need to prove, no kindness too small to matter. Simply rest in this understanding that connects us all. The effects of Priya's renewed kindness began to appear within days, though she was not immediately aware of all the positive changes her actions were creating. Mohan noticed the difference in their interactions right away. The return of warm attention to his stories, genuine interest in his projects, and the sense that his visits to her shop were valued beyond their economic exchange. This restoration of human connection helped lift the depression that had been deepening his isolation. He began taking better care of himself again, participating in community activities he had been avoiding, and reaching out to his family with renewed energy. His son and daughter-in-law noticed the improvement in his spirits and felt relief from the worry that had been affecting their own family relationships. Mohan's grandchildren, sensing their grandfather's improved mood during their visits, began to look forward to seeing him again rather than feeling anxious about his condition. The positive change rippled through multiple generations, strengthening family bonds that had been strained by concern about his well-being. Kavya immediately felt the relief of being able to afford proper alterations for her children's clothing again. The savings weren't large in absolute terms, but they made the difference between managing her tight budget successfully and falling behind on essential expenses. More importantly, her children's clothing began to look neat and well-fitted again, which restored their confidence at school and in social situations. They became more willing to participate in activities with other children, and their improved self-esteem showed up in their academic performance and their relationships with peers. The teacher noticed the positive changes in the children's behavior and appearance, and concluded that whatever economic pressures the family had been facing were now being managed more successfully. This reduced the teacher's concerns about child welfare in the community and decreased the pressure on village resources that had been mobilized to address problems that were actually being resolved through informal networks of mutual aid. Basu's business began to recover as Priya resumed providing the expedited service that enabled him to maintain his professional schedule and appearance. With reliable access to quick repairs when needed, he could again take risks on new merchandise and maintain the trading relationships that made his route profitable. As his business improved, Basu was able to resume visiting some of the smaller villages he had been forced to skip when his route became less economical. This restored access to goods and trading opportunities for communities that had been affected by his reduced travel schedule. The elderly and disabled people who had been unable to travel to distant markets regained access to necessities through Basu's regular visits. Neighbors who had been making extra trips to help these community members could return their attention to their own responsibilities, reducing the burden on everyone involved. The restoration of these trading relationships also brought economic benefits to the region as a whole. Villages that could again access a variety of goods through traveling merchants were able to specialize more in their own production, trading surplus crops or crafts for manufactured items they couldn't produce locally. This increased economic efficiency and prosperity throughout the trading network. Priya began to see how her individual choices were woven into a complex web of relationships that connected her to people and communities far beyond her immediate awareness. Her decision to offer or withhold small kindnesses affected not only her direct customers, but the families, communities, and economic networks that those customers were part of. This understanding gave her a sense of both responsibility and empowerment that she had never experienced before. She was responsible because her actions had consequences that extended far beyond her intentions or awareness. But she was also empowered because her daily choices contributed meaningfully to the well-being of the interconnected systems she was part of. Every interaction in her shop became an opportunity to strengthen the social fabric or weaken it, to contribute to networks of mutual support or undermine them, to participate in the creation of a more caring community or allow it to fragment through neglect. The monk who had sparked this transformation in Priya's understanding remained in the town for several more days, continuing to teach about the interconnectedness of all actions and the importance of compassion in daily life. Priya attended every session, eager to deepen her understanding of how individual choices affected the larger patterns of community well-being. In one teaching, the monk spoke about the Buddha's insight that all beings are connected through networks of mutual dependence so intricate that harming any part of the web ultimately harms the whole, while benefiting any part ultimately benefits the whole. This is why, the monk explained, The cultivation of compassion is not simply a moral obligation, but a practical necessity. When we act with consideration for others' well-being, we strengthen the systems that support our own well-being. When we act without regard for others' welfare, we weaken the networks we ourselves depend upon for survival and happiness. He told the story of a forest where all the trees, plants, and animals formed an interconnected ecosystem. Each species contributed something essential to the health of the whole. Trees provided shade and nutrients. Smaller plants prevented soil erosion. Animals spread seeds and controlled populations of insects and other creatures. No tree in the forest can thrive if the ecosystem as a whole is unhealthy, the monk said. And the ecosystem cannot be healthy if individual trees, plants, and animals do not fulfill their roles in supporting the whole. The well-being of each part and the well-being of the whole are inseparable. Human communities, he explained, functioned according to similar principles. Each person's well-being depended on the health of social networks that connected them to others. And those social networks could only remain healthy if individuals contributed to them through acts of care, consideration, and mutual support. Priya realized that her small kindnesses were like the contributions that individual organisms made to forest ecosystems, seemingly minor actions that were actually essential to maintaining the conditions that made life possible for everyone. This ecological understanding of kindness helped her see why small, generous acts were not insignificant. In complex systems, small inputs often had large effects because they influenced the overall patterns that determined how the system functioned. A forest could be killed by a small change that disrupted crucial relationships between species. A community could be weakened by the withdrawal of small kindnesses that had been maintaining networks of mutual support. Conversely, small positive contributions could strengthen entire systems by reinforcing the relationships that held them together. Individual acts of generosity, like individual trees in a forest, created conditions that made it easier for others to thrive, which in turn created better conditions for everyone. The monk's teaching gave Priya a framework for understanding why her individual choices mattered, even when their immediate effects seemed small. She was not an isolated individual whose private actions stayed private. She was part of living systems that depended on the contributions of all their members for their health and resilience. With this new understanding, Priya began to pay attention not only to opportunities for kindness in her own work, but to the patterns of mutual support that she could observe throughout her community. She noticed how the baker would save day-old bread for families who couldn't afford fresh loaves, how the well-keeper would ensure that elderly people had help drawing water during the dry season, how mothers would share childcare responsibilities so that each could attend to necessary work. These countless small acts of consideration formed an invisible infrastructure of care that made community life possible. Like the root systems that connected trees in a forest, sharing nutrients and information through underground networks, the patterns of human kindness created connections that sustained everyone's well-being in ways that were largely unseen but absolutely essential. Priya also began to notice what happened when these networks were disrupted. During a particularly busy harvest season, when everyone was focused intensely on their own economic needs, the usual patterns of mutual aid became strained. People had less time and energy for the small kindnesses that normally smoothed social interactions and supported those who needed extra help. The effects were subtle but widespread. Elderly people struggled more with daily tasks when neighbors were too busy to offer assistance. Families with young children found it harder to manage their responsibilities when the informal childcare exchanges that usually provided support were temporarily suspended. Merchants and craftspeople became more irritable with customers when the social pleasantries that usually made commercial interactions pleasant were abbreviated due to time pressures. The community didn't collapse during this period, but its quality of life declined measurably. People felt more isolated, more stressed, and less satisfied with their daily experiences. The absence of small kindnesses made everyone's life harder, even though each individual act of consideration that was missing seemed insignificant by itself. When the harvest season ended and people had more time for social connection, the networks of mutual support gradually restored themselves. But the temporary disruption had shown Priya how fragile these systems could be, and how much everyone's well-being depended on the voluntary contributions of care and consideration that individuals made to the social fabric. This observation reinforced her commitment to maintaining her own practices of kindness, even during busy or difficult periods. She understood now that her small acts of generosity were not luxuries that she could afford when times were easy and abandon when they became challenging. They were contributions to the social infrastructure that everyone depended on, especially during times of stress. The monk's presence in the community had sparked similar reflections in many other residents. During his final teaching before departing for the next village on his pilgrimage route, he invited people to share their own insights about interconnection and compassion. An elderly farmer spoke about how he had learned to see his land not as property that belonged to him alone, but as part of a watershed that connected him to all the communities downstream. His choices about how to manage his soil and water affected people he would never meet, just as upstream farmers' choices affected his own crops and livelihood. A mother described how she had begun to understand her children's education not as a private family matter, but as a contribution to the community's future well-being. The knowledge and values her children absorbed would shape how they treated others throughout their lives, making their upbringing a form of service to the generations who would interact with them. A merchant talked about how he had come to see honest dealing not simply as a moral obligation, but as an investment in the trust networks that made commerce possible. Every fair transaction contributed to the reputation for reliability that attracted customers and trading partners to the community, while every deceptive practice undermined the foundations that everyone's economic well-being depended on. Each person's insight revealed another aspect of the intricate web that connected individual choices to collective consequences. Priya listened to these testimonies with growing amazement at the complexity of the relationships she was embedded in, and growing appreciation for how much power each person had to influence the quality of life for countless others. After the monk departed, Priya found herself in conversations with neighbors who had also been moved by his teachings. They began to discuss ways that the community might more consciously support the networks of mutual aid that sustained everyone's well-being. Some suggested organizing regular gatherings where people could share resources and coordinate assistance for community members who needed extra help. Others proposed creating more formal systems for ensuring that elderly or disabled residents had reliable access to necessities. Several people offered to teach their skills to others, creating opportunities for learning that would strengthen the community's overall resilience. But as these discussions continued, Priya began to realize that the most important changes might not require new organizations or formal programs. The networks of care that sustained community life were already in place, woven through the countless daily interactions that people had with each other. What was needed was not so much new structures as renewed attention to the opportunities for kindness that already existed in everyone's regular activities. The baker didn't need to create a new charity program to help hungry families. he could simply continue and expand his existing practice of saving day-old bread for those who needed it. The well-keeper didn't require official authorization to assist elderly people. She could just maintain her informal pattern of checking on those who might need help drawing water. Priya herself didn't need to establish a formal assistance fund. She could continue offering the small discounts and accommodations that helped her customers manage their daily challenges more successfully. The most powerful transformations came not from dramatic new initiatives, but from bringing conscious intention to the small acts of care that were already possible within everyone's existing roles and relationships. This insight helped Priya understand why the monk had focused his teaching on individual awareness and choice rather than proposing collective action programs. Systems of mutual support were created and maintained through the accumulation of countless individual decisions to act with consideration for others' welfare. No external authority could mandate genuine kindness, and no organizational structure could substitute for the voluntary generosity that individuals chose to offer in their daily interactions. The health of the social fabric depended ultimately on each person's recognition of their interconnection with others and their willingness to let that recognition guide their choices. When enough individuals made decisions based on understanding their embeddedness in networks of mutual dependence, the collective result was a community characterized by care, resilience, and shared well-being. But this understanding also made clear why communities could become fragmented and harsh when individuals lost sight of their connections to others. If people came to see themselves as isolated units competing for scarce resources, their behavior would naturally become more selfish and defensive. If they failed to recognize how their choices affected others, they would make decisions based only on immediate personal benefits, creating negative externalities that undermined everyone's quality of life. The cultivation of compassion was thus both a spiritual practice and a practical necessity, a way of maintaining the social conditions that made flourishing possible for all members of the community. Priya's growing understanding of these dynamics made her more attentive to the subtle ways that kindness and selfishness spread through social networks. She noticed how a particularly generous act by one person seemed to inspire others to be more considerate in their own interactions. She observed how rudeness or unfairness in one context could create a ripple of irritability that affected multiple subsequent interactions as people passed along the negative treatment they had received. Emotions and attitudes, like actions, had consequences that extended beyond their immediate contexts. A warm greeting could brighten someone's entire day, influencing how they treated their family, customers, or neighbors. A harsh word could create hurt feelings that affected a person's mood and behavior for hours or even days afterward. This recognition gave Priya a new sense of responsibility for the emotional tone she brought to her interactions with others. She began to see her choice of attitude, whether to approach each customer with warmth or indifference, patience or irritability, as a contribution to the overall emotional climate of the community. When she greeted people with genuine friendliness, she was not simply being polite. She was participating in the creation of a social atmosphere that made everyone's day more pleasant. When she listened with patient attention to customers' concerns, she was modeling the kind of respectful engagement that strengthened the community's capacity for collaborative problem-solving. Even her response to difficult or unreasonable customers became an opportunity to influence the social dynamics around her. When someone was rude or demanding, Priya could choose to respond with defensiveness that would escalate the conflict, or with calm professionalism that might diffuse the tension and perhaps even model a better way of handling frustration. She found that choosing the more generous response in such situations often transformed the entire interaction. Customers who began by acting entitled or impatient frequently became apologetic and appreciative when met with understanding rather than resistance. These transformations didn't happen in every case, but they occurred often enough to reinforce Priya's belief in the power of individual choices to influence collective outcomes. Let us breathe gently here, allowing these insights about the ripple effects of kindness to settle into our understanding. Feel your breath connecting you to this moment, to this teaching, to the web of relationships that holds us all. There is nothing you need to perfect, nothing you must achieve. Simply rest in the recognition that your smallest gestures matter more than you know. As Priya's awareness of interconnection deepened, she began to extend her circle of concern beyond her immediate customers and community. She started thinking about the sources of the materials she used in her work and the effects that her purchasing decisions might have on people involved in producing those materials. The thread she bought came from cotton grown by farmers in distant regions. The dyes that colored fabric were extracted from plants cultivated by people she would never meet. The needles and scissors she used daily were made by craftspeople whose livelihoods depended on orders from merchants who supplied tools to seamstresses throughout the region. Each purchase she made was a vote for particular methods of production and particular systems of trade. When she bought the cheapest available materials without considering how such low prices were made possible, she might inadvertently be supporting labor practices that exploited workers or agricultural methods that damaged the environment. But when she sought out suppliers who treated their workers fairly and used sustainable production methods, even if their goods cost slightly more, she was using her economic power to encourage systems that created well-being rather than harm throughout the entire chain of production and distribution. This expanded understanding of her purchasing power as a form of moral choice meant that Priya had to think more carefully about the sources of her materials. She began asking merchants more detailed questions about where their goods came from and how they were produced. She started seeking out suppliers whose practices aligned with her values, even when this required additional effort or expense. The process was not always straightforward. Information about production methods and labor conditions was often difficult to obtain, and sometimes the most ethical choices were also the most expensive ones, creating tension between her desire to act responsibly and her need to keep her business profitable. But Priya found that many customers were willing to pay slightly higher prices when they understood that the additional cost supported fair wages for workers and sustainable practices in production. Her willingness to educate customers about the hidden social and environmental costs of cheap goods helped them make more informed choices about their own purchasing decisions. This created a positive feedback loop in which conscious consumers supported responsible businesses, which in turn created market incentives for better practices throughout the supply chain. Priya's individual choice to prioritize ethical sourcing contributed to broader changes in the trading networks that connected her community to distant producers. The ripple effects of her decisions extended in both directions, backward to the farmers and craftspeople who produced the materials she used, and forward to the customers who learned from her example to consider the broader implications of their own consumption choices. Priya also began to think more carefully about the disposal of waste materials from her work. Scraps of fabric, worn-out tools, and chemical residues from cleaning processes all had to go somewhere, and their ultimate destination could affect the health of the soil, water, and air that everyone depended on. She started finding creative ways to minimize waste by using fabric scraps for small projects, donating usable remnants to families who could make household items from them, and disposing of chemical waste in ways that prevented contamination of water sources that downstream communities relied upon. These practices required additional time and effort, but they aligned with her growing understanding that there were no purely private actions in interconnected systems. The waste from her individual workshop was tiny compared to the total amount of waste generated by all the economic activity in the region, but it was part of the cumulative impact that determined whether the shared environment could continue supporting healthy life. Just as she had learned that small acts of kindness contributed to social infrastructure that benefited everyone, Priya came to understand that small acts of environmental responsibility contributed to ecological infrastructure that sustained the natural systems all life depended on. Her attention to these connections led her to notice patterns of environmental care and carelessness throughout her community. Some farmers were careful to prevent soil erosion and maintain the fertility of their land for future generations. Others pushed for maximum short-term yields without regard for long-term sustainability. Some craftspeople disposed of their waste materials thoughtfully, considering the effects on water and air quality. Others simply discarded whatever was convenient, assuming that individual contributions to pollution were too small to matter significantly. Some merchants prioritized goods that were produced through methods that preserved natural resources. Others focused solely on profit margins, without considering the environmental costs of the production methods they supported through their purchasing decisions. The cumulative result of all these individual choices was determining whether the region would remain capable of supporting healthy communities over the long term, or whether environmental degradation would gradually undermine the foundations of prosperity and well-being that everyone depended on. Priya began to see environmental responsibility as another dimension of the interconnected web of care that sustained community life. Just as social kindness contributed to networks of mutual support between people, ecological mindfulness contributed to the health of natural systems that provided clean air, water, soil, and climate conditions necessary for human survival. This perspective helped her understand why environmental protection was not a luxury that communities could afford only after meeting all their immediate economic needs, but a fundamental requirement for maintaining the conditions that made economic activity possible in the first place. Healthy soil was necessary for growing the food that fed everyone. Clean water was essential for drinking, cooking, and washing. Stable climate patterns were required for predictable agricultural seasons and weather conditions that didn't destroy homes and infrastructure. When individuals made choices that degraded these natural systems in pursuit of short-term benefits, they were undermining the foundations that their own future well-being depended on, as well as the prospects for their children and all subsequent generations. But when individuals made choices that protected and restored natural systems, even at some cost in immediate convenience or profit, they were investing in the long-term resilience and prosperity of their entire community. The monk's teaching about interconnection had opened Priya's awareness to these environmental dimensions of personal responsibility, just as it had deepened her understanding of the social dimensions of individual choice. Every action existed within webs of relationship that connected the immediate consequences to effects that rippled outward through space and time to touch lives and places far removed from the original decision. This holistic understanding of interconnection made Priya's daily work feel more meaningful than it ever had before. Each garment she mended was not simply a service provided to an individual customer, but a contribution to multiple overlapping systems of well-being. When she repaired torn clothing skillfully, she was helping to extend the useful life of materials that had required natural resources and human labor to produce, reducing the overall demand for new production and its associated environmental costs. When she altered garments to fit growing children or changing bodies, she was helping families avoid the expense of replacing clothes that could still be made useful, supporting their economic resilience and reducing waste. When she treated customers with warmth and consideration, she was contributing to the social atmosphere that made her community a pleasant place to live and strengthening the networks of mutual support that helped everyone navigate their daily challenges. When she chose suppliers whose practices supported fair wages and environmental sustainability, she was using her economic power to encourage systems of production that created well-being throughout the entire supply chain. All of these effects flowed from her individual choices, but none of them were purely individual in their consequences. Every decision she made participated in collective patterns that shaped the social, economic, and environmental conditions that affected countless other people. This recognition gave her a sense of purpose and connection that transformed her understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. She didn't need to become a famous leader or make dramatic sacrifices to contribute significantly to the well-being of the world around her. She simply needed to bring conscious awareness to the choices she was already making every day and align those choices with her understanding of how individual actions affected the larger systems she was embedded in. The seemingly ordinary work of mending clothes and serving customers became a form of spiritual practice, an opportunity to express her recognition of interconnection through concrete acts of care and responsibility. Every interaction became a chance to strengthen the webs of relationship that sustained life. Every purchase became an opportunity to support systems that created flourishing rather than harm. This integration of spiritual insight with practical action made Priya's daily life feel deeply satisfying in ways that purely personal achievements never had. When her success was measured only by individual prosperity or reputation, accomplishments felt somehow hollow despite their immediate pleasure. But when her work was understood as service to the interconnected whole she was part of, even small achievements felt profoundly meaningful. She had discovered what the monk called right livelihood, work that contributed to the well-being of all beings rather than creating harm or exploitation. This didn't require changing her profession or taking on dramatically different responsibilities. It simply required bringing the understanding of interconnection to the work she was already doing and allowing that understanding to guide her choices about how to do that work. Let us rest here for a moment, breathing gently as these teachings about right livelihood and interconnected purpose settle into our hearts. Feel your body supported, your mind at peace. There is no perfect way to live, no standard you must meet. Simply allow your breath to connect you to this moment of learning and rest. The transformation in Priya's understanding of her work began to affect other aspects of her life as well. Her relationships with family members, friends, and neighbors became opportunities to practice the same awareness of interconnection that had enriched her professional interactions. When her younger sister came to visit, struggling with decisions about her own future, Priya listened with the same patient attention she had learned to bring to customers' concerns. She offered advice not as someone who had figured out all the answers, but as someone who understood that individual choices existed within webs of relationship that connected personal well-being to the welfare of others. When neighbors approached her with community problems, disputes over water rights, concerns about children's education, questions about how to help elderly residents, Priya participated in discussions with awareness that solutions needed to serve not just the immediate parties involved, but the long-term health of the social systems that sustained everyone's quality of life. When she observed conflict or tension in her community, she looked for opportunities to contribute to resolution through small acts of bridge building, rather than taking sides in ways that would deepen divisions. Sometimes this meant offering her shop as a neutral space where people could meet to discuss their differences. Other times it involved finding ways to acknowledge the legitimate concerns of all parties while searching for solutions that addressed everyone's underlying needs. These practices of applied interconnection didn't eliminate conflict or solve all community problems, but they contributed to a culture of collaborative problem-solving that made difficulties more manageable and prevented small disagreements from escalating into lasting hostilities. Priya found that the same principles that guided her business relationships, treating each interaction as an opportunity to strengthen social bonds, considering the long-term effects of immediate choices, seeking solutions that created well-being for everyone involved, were equally valuable in all her other relationships. Her family noticed the change in her approach to daily life. She became more patient with frustrations, more generous with her time and attention, and more thoughtful about the effects of her words and actions on others' feelings and circumstances. Her friends appreciated her increased availability as a listener and advisor, but also her greater wisdom in offering counsel that considered multiple perspectives and long-term consequences rather than just immediate desires. Her neighbors began to see her as a reliable source of support during difficulties and a voice of reason during community discussions about complex issues. This growth in her reputation as a wise and caring person brought increased respect and influence, but Priya understood that these benefits were not the goal of practicing compassionate awareness. They were natural consequences of aligning her choices with the reality of interconnection. When people trust someone to consider their welfare alongside her own, they naturally turn to that person for advice and collaboration. When someone consistently acts in ways that strengthen community bonds, she naturally becomes a respected voice in community decisions. When someone's words and actions demonstrate understanding of how individual choices affect collective outcomes, others naturally seek her perspective on complex problems. The influence that flows from practicing genuine compassion is different from influence that is pursued for its own sake, because it serves the welfare of the whole rather than just personal ambition. People who seek power primarily for personal benefit often find themselves isolated by others' mistrust of their motives. But people who exercise influence in service of collective well-being often find themselves supported by communities that recognize their authentic commitment to shared welfare. This distinction helped Priya understand why some leaders inspired genuine loyalty and cooperation, while others could command only grudging compliance. Authority based on wisdom and compassion created willing collaboration because people felt confident that their welfare was being considered alongside the leader's own interests. But authority based primarily on personal ambition or external force generated resistance because people sensed that their needs were secondary to the leader's agenda. The monk's teaching about interconnection had revealed principles that applied not only to individual choices, but to leadership, governance, and all forms of collective organization. Communities thrived when they were guided by people who understood that their own well-being was inseparable from the well-being of those they served. They struggled when led by those who saw leadership primarily as an opportunity for personal advancement. These insights about leadership made Priya more discerning in her responses to various people who sought to guide community decisions. She learned to distinguish between those who demonstrated genuine care for collective welfare and those whose primary motivation appeared to be personal benefit. When community members with authentic compassion proposed solutions to shared problems, she offered her support and participation, even when the proposed actions required personal sacrifice or inconvenience. But when individuals whose motives seemed primarily self-serving tried to rally support for their agendas, she remained politely non-committal while looking for alternative approaches that would better serve everyone's interests. This discernment was particularly important during a controversy that arose in her community about how to respond to an influx of refugees from a region where drought had made farming impossible. Some residents wanted to welcome the newcomers and share resources to help them establish new lives. Others worried that additional people would strain the community's capacity to provide for its existing members. Both perspectives had validity, and the solution required careful thought about how to balance compassion for those in need with responsibility for maintaining the systems that sustained everyone's well-being. The discussion revealed different understandings of what it meant to live in accordance with the principle of interconnection. Those who advocated for welcoming refugees argued that people in desperate need had claims on the assistance of those who were more fortunate, and that communities had moral obligations to share resources with anyone who sought help. They pointed out that the refugees' situation could easily become anyone's situation if environmental or economic disasters struck their own region. Those who urged caution argued that communities had primary responsibilities to their existing members, and that taking on obligations beyond their capacity to fulfill would ultimately help no one. They worried that generous impulses, however admirable, could lead to commitments that would overwhelm available resources and create hardship for everyone involved. Priya listened carefully to both sides of this debate, trying to understand how the principle of interconnection applied to such complex situations. The refugees were certainly connected to her community through shared humanity and through the environmental systems that had caused the drought affecting their region. But her community was also interconnected with its existing members, who had legitimate expectations that their needs would be considered in any decisions about resource allocation. The interconnectedness that the monk had taught about didn't provide simple answers to difficult questions about competing claims and limited resources. Instead, it offered a framework for thinking about such questions that considered the welfare of everyone involved and the long-term health of the systems that sustained all life. After extensive community discussions, Priya found herself part of a council that was tasked with developing a response to the refugee situation that would honor both the principle of compassion and the reality of practical limitations. The process of working through this challenge deepened her understanding of how interconnection functioned in complex situations where simple answers were inadequate. The council began by gathering detailed information about both the refugees' needs and the community's capacity to provide assistance. They discovered that the newcomers included skilled farmers, craftspeople, and traders whose knowledge and abilities could actually benefit the community if integration was handled thoughtfully. Many of the refugees had experience with drought-resistant farming techniques that could help local farmers adapt to the increasingly unpredictable weather patterns affecting the region. Some were skilled in crafts that complemented existing local production. Others had trading connections that could open new markets for goods produced in the community. This information suggested that welcoming refugees need not be a one-way transfer of resources from existing residents to newcomers, but could be structured as a mutual exchange that strengthened everyone's resilience and prosperity. The interconnection between the two groups could create benefits that neither could achieve separately. But realizing this potential required careful planning to prevent the initial period of integration from overwhelming available resources. The council developed a phased approach that would bring refugees into the community gradually, ensuring that housing, food, and work opportunities could be provided sustainably. Priya contributed to this process by offering to teach some of the refugee women the local styles of clothing construction and repair, enabling them to earn income through work that complemented rather than competed with her own services. She also arranged for her supplier relationships to accommodate increased demand for materials as the number of people engaged in textile work expanded. The integration process was not without difficulties. Cultural differences created misunderstandings that required patience and goodwill to resolve. Economic adjustments caused temporary disruptions as new people found their places in existing systems of production and exchange. Social tensions arose as established residents and newcomers navigated questions of belonging and influence in community decisions. But the framework of conscious interconnection that guided the integration process helped the community work through these challenges constructively. When problems arose, they were addressed through discussions that sought solutions benefiting everyone involved, rather than victories for one group over another. The refugees' knowledge of drought-resistant farming did prove valuable when the next dry season was more severe than any in recent memory. Techniques they shared with local farmers helped maintain food production levels that would otherwise have declined dramatically. The community's decision to welcome these newcomers had strengthened its resilience in ways that became apparent only when that resilience was tested. Meanwhile, the refugees benefited not only from material assistance, but from inclusion in social networks that provided emotional support and practical cooperation. Their children attended the local school, where they learned alongside established residents' children, creating relationships that would connect the two groups for generations to come. The success of this integration reinforced Priya's understanding that interconnection was not simply a spiritual teaching, but a practical principle for addressing complex challenges. When communities recognized their connections to others and structured their responses to difficulties accordingly, they often discovered solutions that served everyone's interests more effectively than approaches based on competition or exclusion. This experience also deepened her appreciation for the monk's insight that individual actions existed within larger systems. Her personal decision to teach textile skills to refugee women had been small in itself, but it had contributed to a community-wide process of integration that transformed both the newcomers' prospects and the existing residents' understanding of their own capacity for adaptation and growth. The ripple effects of welcoming refugees extended far beyond the immediate community. Other villages in the region observed the successful integration and began developing their own approaches to assisting displaced people, creating a network of mutual aid that strengthened the entire area's ability to respond to environmental and economic challenges. Trade relationships expanded as refugees' connections to their regions of origin created new channels for commerce between areas that had previously had little contact. Cultural exchanges enriched everyone's understanding of different approaches to farming, crafts, cooking, music, and storytelling. Children who grew up in this more diverse community developed broader perspectives and stronger skills for collaborating with people from different backgrounds, capacities that would serve them well as they became adults in an increasingly interconnected world. Let us breathe gently here, feeling the wisdom of these teachings about community resilience and mutual aid settling into our hearts. Allow your shoulders to soften, your breath to flow naturally. There is nothing you need to solve right now, nothing you must figure out alone. As the seasons turned and the integration of refugees became a settled part of community life, Priya began to reflect on how much her understanding had expanded since the monk's visit had first opened her awareness to the principle of interconnection. She had begun by recognizing how her small acts of kindness created ripples of positive consequence that extended far beyond her immediate awareness. This recognition had motivated her to resume and expand practices of generosity that strengthened the social fabric of her community. From there, her awareness had grown to encompass the environmental dimensions of her choices, leading her to consider how her purchasing decisions and waste disposal practices affected the natural systems that sustained all life in her region. The refugee situation had revealed how interconnection functioned at the level of communities and regions, showing her that isolated approaches to complex challenges were less effective than collaborative responses that recognized shared interests and mutual dependence. But now she was beginning to understand that these were all aspects of a single, all-encompassing web of relationship that connected every being and every action in an intricate pattern of mutual influence and interdependence. The water system that had carried Natan's dye waste to distant communities was the same water system that brought life-giving rain to the crops that fed everyone in the region. The trade networks that distributed goods produced by her suppliers were the same networks that had enabled refugees to find new homes when their original communities became uninhabitable. The children who played together in her community's school, regardless of whether their families had lived there for generations or arrived recently as refugees, would grow up to become the adults who would face whatever challenges the future brought to their shared region. Everything was connected to everything else in ways that made the welfare of each part inseparable from the welfare of the whole. This insight was not merely philosophical, but intensely practical, because it revealed that lasting well-being was possible only through approaches that served the interconnected systems rather than trying to benefit some parts at the expense of others. This understanding transformed Priya's relationship not only to her work and community, but to her own life and identity. She began to see herself not as an isolated individual pursuing personal goals, but as a conscious participant in the vast web of relationships that sustained all life. Her daily choices, what to eat, how to treat customers, which suppliers to buy from, how to dispose of waste, what attitudes to bring to social interactions, were all opportunities to strengthen or weaken the systems she was embedded in. This recognition brought both humility and empowerment. Humility, because it revealed how dependent she was on countless other beings and processes for her survival and well-being. Empowerment, because it showed how much influence she had through her choices to affect the quality of life for everyone connected to her through the web of relationships. She was not a passive victim of circumstances beyond her control, nor was she an isolated individual whose actions affected only herself. She was an active participant in interconnected systems, where her choices mattered enormously, but where lasting satisfaction came from serving the welfare of the whole rather than pursuing purely personal benefits. This perspective made even mundane activities feel meaningful because they were opportunities to express her understanding of interconnection through concrete actions. Mending a tear in someone's clothing became an act of care for both the individual customer and the larger systems of resource conservation and community support. Listening patiently to an elderly customer's stories became a contribution to the networks of intergenerational connection that preserved wisdom and maintained social bonds. Offering fair prices became a way of supporting the economic relationships that enabled everyone in the trading network to earn decent livelihoods. The integration of spiritual insight with daily activity created a sense of purpose and satisfaction that purely individual achievements had never provided. Priya's life felt deeply meaningful, not because she had accomplished extraordinary things, but because her ordinary activities were aligned with her understanding of how individual choices affected the interconnected whole. Years passed. The refugee integration that had seemed so challenging initially became simply part of the community's normal life. New environmental challenges arose and were addressed through collaborative approaches that drew on everyone's knowledge and resources. Economic changes created opportunities for some community members and difficulties for others, but the networks of mutual support that had been strengthened through conscious attention to interconnection helped everyone adapt successfully. Priya's role in the community continued to evolve as her reputation for wisdom and fairness grew. People sought her advice not because she had formal authority or special qualifications, but because her choices consistently demonstrated care for everyone's welfare and understanding of how immediate decisions affected long-term consequences. She found herself serving on councils that addressed various community issues, mediating disputes between neighbors, and mentoring younger people who were learning trades or facing difficult life decisions. But she understood that this influence was not a personal achievement. It was a natural result of aligning her actions with the principle of interconnection that the monk had taught. When people trust someone to consider their welfare alongside her own, they naturally turn to that person for guidance. When someone's words and actions demonstrate understanding of how individual choices affect collective outcomes, others naturally seek her perspective on complex problems. The authority that flows from practicing genuine wisdom is different from power that is pursued for its own sake, because it serves the welfare of the whole, rather than personal ambition. This made Priya's influence feel like a responsibility rather than a privilege, an opportunity to serve the interconnected systems she was part of, rather than to advance her own interests. One day, many years after the monk's original visit, another traveling teacher arrived in the community. This one was a young woman who had heard about the successful refugee integration and wanted to learn how the community had managed such a complex challenge so peacefully. Priya was asked to meet with the visiting teacher and explain the principles that had guided their approach. As she described the process of recognizing interconnection and structuring responses to serve everyone's welfare, she realized how much her own understanding had deepened through years of applying these insights to practical situations. The key insight, she told the young teacher, was understanding that we were all part of the same system. The refugees' problems were our problems because we shared the same environment, the same regional economy, and ultimately the same human condition of vulnerability to forces beyond any individual's control. She continued, "Once we recognized our interconnection, it became clear that solutions which served only our existing community while ignoring the refugees' needs would ultimately weaken the larger systems we all depended on. But approaches that overwhelmed our capacity in order to help the refugees would have helped no one in the long run. What we needed," Priya explained, "was responses that strengthened the whole system by enabling everyone to contribute their abilities and meet their basic needs. This required careful planning and gradual implementation, but it created benefits that none of us could have achieved separately." The young teacher asked how the community had learned to think in such interconnected terms. Priya described the monk's original teaching and how it had opened people's awareness to the ripple effects of their individual choices. But the real learning, she said, came from applying these insights to daily decisions and observing the results. When we started making choices based on understanding our connections to others, we began to see how those connections actually functioned in practice. She told the story of her own transformation from someone who dismissed small acts of kindness as insignificant to someone who understood such actions as contributions to the social infrastructure that sustained everyone's well-being. "I used to think that small gestures didn't matter because they seemed tiny compared to the scale of other people's problems," Priya said. "But I learned that small actions combine with other small actions to create the conditions that determine whether communities thrive or struggle. When many people make small choices based on consideration for others' welfare," she continued, "the cumulative result is a community characterized by mutual support and resilience. When people make choices based only on immediate personal benefits, the The result is social fragmentation that makes everyone's life more difficult and insecure. The young teacher was particularly interested in how individuals could maintain motivation for considering others' welfare when the benefits were often invisible and the personal costs were immediate and obvious. The motivation comes from understanding that your own well-being is actually inseparable from others' well-being, Priya replied. When you truly recognize that you exist within systems of mutual dependence, caring for those systems becomes caring for yourself. It's like maintaining the health of a forest, she explained, drawing on an analogy the monk had used. Each tree benefits from the health of the whole forest, the soil conditions, the water cycle, the networks of nutrients shared through root systems. A tree that tried to maximize its own growth by taking resources from other trees would ultimately undermine the conditions its own survival depended on. Similarly, Priya continued, humans who try to maximize their individual well-being without regard for the social and environmental systems they're embedded in end up undermining the foundations their own happiness depends on. She described how her expanded awareness of interconnection had made her daily life more satisfying rather than more burdensome. When you understand how your choices affect others, every action becomes meaningful. Even ordinary activities become opportunities to contribute to something larger than yourself. The young teacher spent several days in the community, observing how the principles Priya had described actually functioned in daily life. She watched how disputes were resolved through processes that sought solutions serving everyone involved rather than victories for one side over another. She noticed how economic exchanges were conducted with attention to fairness and long-term sustainability rather than just immediate profit. She saw how community decisions were made through discussions that considered effects on all residents, including the most vulnerable members, rather than just majority preferences. She observed how environmental practices reflected understanding that individual choices affected shared resources that everyone depended on. She witnessed how cultural differences between long-term residents and more recent arrivals were handled through patient efforts to find common ground rather than demands for conformity. Most impressively, she saw how these practices had become natural parts of community life rather than formal policies that had to be enforced through external authority. People acted considerately toward others and responsibly toward shared resources because they understood their interconnection, not because rules required them to do so. This is what the Buddha meant by right livelihood and right community, the young teacher observed. When people align their actions with understanding of interdependence, they create conditions that support everyone's spiritual and material well-being. Before leaving, the visiting teacher asked if she could share the community's story with other places she planned to visit. Priya agreed, but with an important caveat. Remember that the specific approaches we developed were shaped by our particular circumstances, she said. Other communities will face different challenges and have different resources. What matters is not copying our exact methods, but understanding the underlying principle of interconnection and applying it to whatever situations arise. The key insight, she emphasized, is recognizing that individual well-being and collective well-being are inseparable, and structuring choices accordingly. How that insight gets expressed in practice will vary depending on local conditions and needs. After the young teacher departed, Priya reflected on how much her own understanding had grown through the process of articulating these principles to someone else. Teaching others about interconnection had deepened her own grasp of how these dynamics functioned and why they mattered so much. She realized that sharing wisdom was itself an expression of interconnection, a recognition that insights gained through individual experience belonged to the larger web of relationships rather than just to the person who had received them initially. The monk who had first visited her community years earlier had been living this principle by traveling from place to place, sharing teachings that he had received from his own teachers and enriched through his personal practice and experience. The young teacher who had just left was continuing this process by learning from various communities and carrying their insights to new places where they might inspire other approaches to collaborative living. Priya herself was now part of this network of wisdom sharing, though she had never planned to become a teacher. Her role had emerged naturally from her commitment to understanding and applying the principle of interconnection in daily life. This pattern repeated throughout the web of relationships she was embedded in. People who aligned their actions with understanding of interdependence naturally became sources of wisdom and inspiration for others, not through deliberate effort to teach, but through the example of living in accordance with these principles. Communities that structured their activities around recognition of mutual dependence became models that other communities could learn from and adapt to their own circumstances. The ripple effects of practicing interconnected awareness spread outward through social networks, just as the consequences of neglecting interconnection had spread through the water systems and trading relationships in the stories they had heard at the beginning of this journey. But positive ripples, like negative ones, were ultimately beyond any individual's control once they were set in motion. Priya could live according to her understanding of interconnection and share that understanding with others who were interested, but she could not determine how far those influences would travel or what specific effects they would have in places and times she would never know about. This recognition brought a deep sense of peace. She was responsible for aligning her own choices with her understanding of interdependence, but she was not responsible for controlling the outcomes that flowed from those choices as they moved through systems larger than any individual could comprehend or direct. The responsibility was to act with wisdom and compassion based on her best understanding of how her choices affected others. The results belonged to the interconnected whole, unfolding according to patterns that no single person could predict or manage. Let us rest here for a moment, breathing gently as these teachings about wisdom, responsibility, and acceptance settle into our hearts. Feel your breath connecting you to this moment, to these insights, to the understanding that grows through patient attention to how we are all woven together. Many more seasons passed. Priya grew older, her hair silver now, her hands still skilled but moving more slowly as arthritis settled into her joints. The community continued to evolve, facing new challenges and opportunities that tested and strengthened their commitment to collaborative approaches based on recognition of interconnection. Some of the refugee children who had arrived years earlier were now adults with children of their own, fully integrated into community life, but still maintaining connections to their families' regions of origin. These ongoing relationships had created a network of mutual support that helped all the connected communities respond more effectively to environmental and economic changes affecting the broader region. Young people who had grown up witnessing their community's successful integration of newcomers became adults who brought sophisticated understanding of diversity and collaboration to their own leadership roles. The skills they had developed through childhood experience of navigating cultural differences served them well as traders, craft workers, and council members dealing with increasingly complex relationships between communities. The environmental practices that had been adopted to address immediate challenges had evolved into a comprehensive approach to resource management that enhanced the region's resilience to climate variations while maintaining prosperous livelihoods for residents. Other communities had adopted similar approaches, creating a larger network of sustainable practices that benefited everyone involved. Priya's own role in the community had gradually shifted from active seamstress to elder advisor, though she still did some sewing when her arthritis allowed and customers particularly requested her work. Her primary contribution now was wisdom gained through decades of conscious attention to how individual choices affected interconnected systems. People sought her counsel not only for personal problems, but for guidance on community decisions that required balancing multiple interests and considering long-term consequences. Her reputation for fairness and insight had grown throughout the region, and visitors from distant communities sometimes came specifically to consult with her about complex challenges they were facing. But Priya understood that the wisdom people attributed to her was not personal achievement, but accumulated understanding that belonged to the interconnected whole. Her insights had developed through interaction with countless other people, through application of teachings she had received from the monk and other sources, and through observation of patterns that revealed themselves only over time and through collective experience. She was simply a temporary vessel for wisdom that flowed through the networks of relationship connecting all beings. Her role was to receive these insights clearly, apply them faithfully, and share them generously with others who could benefit from them. This understanding freed her from any sense of pride about her reputation or anxiety about her legacy. The wisdom was not hers to own or control. It belonged to the web of interdependence that connected all life. Her responsibility was to serve as a clear channel for its expression while she was able to do so. As her physical capabilities declined, Priya began training younger people who showed interest in the principles that had guided her life and work. She taught them not only practical skills of sewing and textile work, but the deeper understanding of how individual choices affected interconnected systems. Every action exists within webs of relationship, she would tell her students. When you mend a piece of clothing, you are not simply fixing fabric. You are extending the useful life of materials that required natural resources and human labor to produce. You are helping a family avoid the expense of replacement. You are contributing to patterns of resource conservation that affect environmental health. When you interact with customers, she continued, you are not simply conducting business transactions. You are participating in the creation of social atmosphere that makes community life pleasant or difficult. You are modeling ways of treating others that influence how they treat people throughout their day. When you choose suppliers, she explained, you are not simply acquiring materials for your work. You are voting with your purchasing power for production methods and labor practices. You are supporting systems that create well-being or exploitation throughout the supply chain. Her students learned to see their work as a form of service to the interconnected whole rather than just personal livelihood. This perspective made their daily activities feel meaningful and gave them guidance for making decisions that served both their individual needs and the welfare of the larger systems they were part of. Some of these students went on to establish their own textile workshops in other communities, carrying with them the principles Priya had taught and adapting them to new circumstances. Others applied these insights to different types of work: farming, trading, crafts, teaching, discovering how understanding of interconnection could guide choices in any profession. The ripple effects of Priya's teaching continued to spread outward through networks of relationship, just as the original monk's teaching had created expanding circles of influence that had transformed her own understanding and practice. But now, Priya was approaching the final stage of her participation in these ongoing patterns of influence and interdependence. Her body was growing weaker, and she sensed that her time in this particular form was drawing to a close. This prospect brought no fear or regret, only deep gratitude for the opportunity to have participated consciously in the web of relationships that sustained all life. She had learned to see her individual existence not as something separate from the interconnected whole, but as a temporary expression of the larger patterns that connected all beings. Her death, when it came, would be like a wave returning to the ocean, a dissolution back into the source from which her individual life had emerged. The wisdom she had embodied would continue flowing through the networks of relationships she had participated in, carried forward by the people she had influenced, and the systems she had helped to strengthen. This understanding made the approaching end of her life feel like a natural completion rather than a loss. She had played her part in the ongoing dance of interdependence, contributing what she could to the well-being of the interconnected whole. Now, it was time for others to carry forward the patterns she had helped to weave. On a quiet morning in early spring, as sunlight filtered through the windows of her workshop where she sat mending one final piece of clothing, Priya felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The fabric in her hands, worn soft by years of use, carefully patched and repatched by loving hands, seemed to her a perfect metaphor for the interconnected web of life. Each thread was connected to every other thread, and the strength of the fabric came from the way individual strands supported each other in an intricate pattern of mutual dependence. When threads wore out or broke, new ones could be woven in to maintain the integrity of the whole. The fabric's beauty lay not in any individual thread, but in the pattern they created together. Her own life had been one thread in the vast tapestry of relationships that connected all beings. The thread was reaching the end of its span, but the pattern would continue, enriched by her contributions and strengthened by the connections she had helped to weave. As her breath grew shallow and her heartbeat slowed, Priya felt herself dissolving back into the interconnected whole that had given her life meaning and purpose. Her final thought was a word of gratitude for the monk whose teaching had opened her eyes to the truth of interdependence, for the customers and community members who had given her opportunities to practice wisdom and compassion, and for the intricate web of relationships that had allowed her individual existence to serve something infinitely larger than herself. Let us breathe together now in this moment of completion and gratitude. Feel your breath connecting you to the vast web of relationships that sustains all life. Allow your shoulders to soften completely, your jaw to release, your entire body to settle into perfect rest. We have traveled far together through these stories of consequence and connection. We have seen how Natan's small act of dumping dye waste created ripples of harm that eventually returned to affect his own children, teaching us that there are no purely private actions when we live in systems of mutual dependence. We discovered how Gopal's seemingly minor thefts set in motion a chain of consequences that led to his master's death and the suffering of soldiers who depended on reliable weapons, showing us that even small deceptions can undermine the systems of trust that hold society together. We learned from Savita how pride in our expertise can blind us to the limits of our knowledge, potentially costing lives when we refuse help from others whose skills complement our own. We witnessed how Devi's minor dishonesty in weights and measures contributed to a family's destruction, revealing how small unfairnesses accumulate to create larger systems of exploitation and desperation. We saw how Arjun's lies about his credentials taught his students that truth was optional, creating patterns of dishonesty that could lead to dangerous situations when people overestimated their qualifications. And we followed Priya's journey from dismissing small kindnesses as insignificant to understanding them as essential contributions to the social infrastructure that sustains community well-being. All of these teachings point to the same fundamental truth. We exist within webs of relationships so intricate that every action, no matter how small, sends ripples through the entire system. What we do in private becomes public through the networks that connect us to countless others. What seems insignificant in isolation becomes meaningful through its place in larger patterns of consequence. This understanding brings both great responsibility and great empowerment. We are responsible because our choices affect others in ways we cannot always see or predict. But we are also empowered because every moment offers opportunities to contribute to the well-being of the interconnected whole we are part of. The choice is always before us. Will we act with awareness of our connections to others, or will we act as if our choices existed in isolation? Will we contribute to systems that create mutual flourishing, or will we participate in patterns that generate suffering and division? The deepest teaching is this: you are not separate from the web of life that connects all beings. Your individual well-being and the welfare of the whole are ultimately inseparable. When you act with understanding of this truth, your smallest gestures become expressions of wisdom and compassion that ripple outward to touch lives you will never know about, eventually returning to you transformed and multiplied. Let your breathing become slower now, deeper and more peaceful. Allow everything to soften. Your muscles, your thoughts, your need to hold on to anything at all. Feel yourself supported by the same interconnected web that supported all the characters in these stories, the same patterns of mutual dependence that sustain every moment of every life. There is nothing you need to understand perfectly, nothing you must remember exactly. These teachings live not in your memory, but in your choices, not in your thoughts, but in your actions, not in your knowing, but in your being. Simply rest now in the recognition that you are held by connections you cannot see, supported by relationships you may never become aware of, blessed by the kindness of countless beings whose small acts of care create the conditions that make your life possible. You are both utterly unique and completely interconnected, both fully responsible for your choices and lovingly supported by the whole. This is the paradox and the peace of understanding how we are all woven together in the great tapestry of existence. Sleep well, knowing that your smallest kindnesses matter more than you can imagine, that your presence in this world creates ripples of benefit that will continue long after you have forgotten these words, that you are both the author of your choices and the beneficiary of countless others' generosity. Rest in the understanding that nothing you do disappears without effect, that every moment of awareness contributes to the awakening of the whole, that your individual journey toward wisdom and compassion serves the liberation of all beings everywhere. Let go of everything now except the gentle rhythm of your breath and the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you belong in the vast web of relationships that connects all life. Allow yourself to sink into sleep as naturally as a wave returns to the ocean, as effortlessly as a thread weaves itself into the eternal pattern. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.